Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei got harem with Sona? Part 5. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Ollie was bored. Oh, she supposed that, as cities went, Kyoto was pretty enough. But there wasn't really anything to grab her interest. Especially since Lavinia was busy with her magician stuff. And Lavinia probably wouldn't be happy with her getting into a tussle. She was genuinely tempted. A lot of the men kept giving her appraising looks, and it was irritating. She felt her stomach growl softly and rolled her eyes. Well, getting a snack probably wasn't a bad idea. She thought she'd seen a coffee shop back the way she came. This isn't the kind of crowd I usually deal with, Issei joked as he looked at their drinks. Sona snorted. Not even magic could deal with the storage capacity here. The two of them regarded their drinks. Part of Alpha Food and Drink's gimmick was the sugar cloud dangling over their coffee drinks. They were connected to the drinks by rain-like tendrils caused by the interaction of the steam and sugar. The resulting beverages looked like clouds were raining coffee into the cups. I guess you drink it like this, he wondered aloud, scooting the cloud gently to one side and leaning down to sip. It was a bit of a pain, trying to balance the cup while keeping the cloud shoved to one side, but the drink was definitely sweet. Hang on, Sona said, looking around carefully. After a moment, she touched the cloud above her own drink, which turned watery looking briefly, then scooted aside obediently. She nodded in satisfaction, then did the same with Issei's. He brightened. Thanks. That helps. He lifted the cup and took another deeper drink. She smiled. Little things like that help me fine-tune my hydrokinesis. I'm sure you can try something similar with your pyrokinesis. Probably, he agreed, looking around the coffee shop. It was about half full at this time of day, the lunch rush having long since dissipated. He started to turn back toward Sona, but he heard the sound of the front door's signal bell and glanced towards it. Issei had come a long way in self-control, even before he and Sona had fallen for each other. But that didn't mean he was blind to a pretty girl, and this girl was definitely a knockout. She had garnet eyes and long silvery hair that was held in place by a simple black hairband, an oddly feminine touch that contrasted sharply with the rest of her outfit. A black and blue biker-esque leather jacket, a maroon work shirt, gray jeans, and black work boots. Her beautiful features were schooled into a distracted yet menacing expression. He shrugged to himself. A beautiful girl walking into a restaurant was hardly front-page news. There was something about her, though, that kept him from completely looking away. He narrowed his eyes, trying to figure out what it was. Sona followed his gaze. Fortunately, she seemed more amused than anything else. She's very pretty, she commented. Yeah, but that's not it, Issei said hurriedly, keeping his voice pitched so that only Sona could hear him. There's something odd, and I can't quite figure out what. She looked at his expression, and whatever she saw there was sufficient to convince her he was serious. What do you think it is? She asked. I don't know, he said, his tone slightly distracted. Now that he was thinking about it, there was something he recognized, some kind of scent or underscent that he'd experienced before, but he couldn't put his finger on it. After a moment, he sighed and shook his head. It's not coming to me. He shrugged. It's probably not important. Sona glanced the girl's direction as well, her lips pursed in thought. Maybe it'll come to you later, she said encouragingly. Yeah, maybe, he said, not convinced. Oh, well. He took another long drink from the mug. This is actually pretty good. Might be worth the occasional trip. Or simply learning to make it ourselves, Sona said with a wry smile. As they spoke, the girl had approached the counter and placed an order. Once she was served, she strode past Issei and Sona's table, paused after a few steps, and turned to look thoughtfully at them. Sona met her eyes and asked politely, is something wrong? No, the girl blinked, narrowing her eyes slightly, and shook her head. I'm sorry. Something felt familiar about you too. Her nose twitched and her eyes met Issei's. For a moment, they stared quizzically at each other, and then it was her turn to shrug. It was my mistake. I'm sorry. With that, she continued carrying her drink and sandwich to her table. Issei and Sona looked at each other, and all they could do was shrug as well. Math had never been Asia's favorite subject. It wasn't that she was bad at it. The teachers in the convent, now piquing the students' interests, had never been a priority for them. These aptitude tests were different. They felt more like a curtain being drawn open, giving her light to see the room clearly, instead of groping around in the dark. The path was becoming easy to follow. And, as she followed that path, she began to notice something. Is anyone else feeling a breeze? She asked in a half-distracted tone. Her eyes were still fixed on her test papers. A bit of one, Lavinia said amiably. Not from the window, though. Look up. Asia did, and her mouth fell open as she realized that a gentle breeze was surrounding her. More than that, it was dancing and capering around her like a trained animal. You're on the aerokinesis part of the testing, aren't you? Lavinia's tone made it more of a statement than a question. Yes, Asia said, narrowing her eyes slightly. It took a little concentration, but the breeze disappeared, as if a switch had been thrown. Is this how natural inclinations show themselves during the testing? Usually, the Grasshopper magician admitted. I don't think there's any question about it, then. I agree, Rio said, giving Asia an admiring look. Look at the flow of your aerokinesis. It moves with such grace. I'm not surprised, your aunt had some skill with it. It looks like yours is stronger, though. Asia looked thoughtful at that. We're certainly off to a good start, Lavinia said enthusiastically. Is there anything you'd like to focus on as part of your training? Self-defense, Asia said promptly. Or being able to defend both myself and others. She inclined her head respectfully to Riaz. I think I'd do the most good for both myself and Riasan if I could both heal and help defend her peerage. She hesitated, then added, at the same time, though, I'd prefer not to hurt anyone more than I absolutely have to. The more versatile you are, the better off both of us are, Riaz agreed. Very prudent of you. Lavinia thought for a moment, then nodded firmly. Take the second book and turn to chapter 3. The first spell there should be almost perfect for you. Asia nodded, reaching for the second book in the stack. She flipped through it to the aforementioned chapter, and her eyes lit up with interest as she saw the spell. Yes, this is exactly what I wanted. How did she trailed off as Rio and Lavinia suddenly stiffened. Riaz was looking at them in equal confusion, but her expression cleared after a moment. Come to think of it, she was starting to sense something happening. What is that? Someone is straining the wards around the shop, Rio said tersely. And this entire neighborhood has passive protections, too. So, for that strain to be detectable, she gave Riaz a sharp, albeit non-hostile, look. How public was the knowledge that you and Sona-chan were coming to Kyoto with us? We didn't advertise it, but we didn't really keep it hidden either, Riaz replied, her expression chagrined. You think I'm the target? I don't know for sure, but I do know that the House of Gremory has enemies, Rio answered. And so does the House of Sitri. Her expression had gone slightly pale, no doubt, she was thinking of Issei and Sona being caught unawares. We need to move before anyone in the neighborhood is harmed. Asia nodded, starting to rise, but the sliding wooden door suddenly imploded. She flinched backwards, then forced herself to rise. Riaz was already gently chivying her behind her, the even-limbed scarlet of her mother's ancestral power, starting to gather in her hands. A dozen figures piled through, all of them in robes adorned with devil iconography. The apparent leader, a beautiful woman with shoulder-length emerald hair and eyes that matched, sneered at Riaz as she sauntered in. Well. The crimson-haired ruined princess in a Kyoto faction bolt hole. What are you up to? Do I know you? Riaz answered back haughtily, before adding, and do you really want to cause damage in a city we have no quarrel with? The houses of Gremory and Sitri and the four great Satans may have no quarrel with the Kyoto faction, the woman answered. The same doesn't go for the true heirs of Devilkind. Riaz sucked in a sharp breath, her eyes going cold. The true heirs, you're the old Satan faction. Just so. The woman gave her a mocking bow. I offer you a choice. Come with us of your own volition, and we kill your friends painlessly. Resist, and my men have fun with them first. Her smirk turned into a leer, the ugliness of her intent tainting her natural beauty, and her cronies let out equally ugly chuckles. You really think it'll be that easy? Riaz retorted, the coolness of her tone carrying brief echoes of Sona. I do. Without warning, the woman blasted Riaz with a bolt of blue-hued magenta light. She stumbled backwards, then patted herself down, surprised that she was unharmed. Snarling, she started to cast her power of destruction at the green-haired woman, and her jaw fell open as the House of Baal's ancestral power sputtered out. Perhaps you've heard of my family's power. When used against an opponent I've studied, it can make even the power of destruction worthless, the woman chuckled. You're Belial, Riaz whispered. She continued to try to cast the power of destruction, but the demonic energy kept guttering out. Indeed. My version of it isn't perfect, but it will hold you long enough to finish my other business. The woman gave her another mocking bow and turned towards Rio and Lavinia. I'm feeling generous. If one of you is willing to volunteer as the entertainment, the other will die painlessly. So will the little blonde behind Ria's Gremory. She smirked, clearly expecting the mere human magicians to capitulate with little more than angry bluster. She wasn't prepared for Rio and Lavinia to exchange looks and chuckle. What's so funny? She snapped, her surface blitheness disappearing. Shall I? Lavinia offered. Rio gave her a go-ahead gesture. Please. Very gracious of you, Lavinia replied and shifted her gaze towards the Belial woman. Even though Asia wasn't in a position to see her new mentor's expression, she shuddered at the power and confidence in her voice. You've made a big mistake. Absolute demise. The Belial woman's mouth fell open, but before she could speak, a 3-meter-tall figure comprised entirely of ice appeared in the room. The figure was in the form of a roughly humanoid doll, wearing a frilly dress and sporting 4 arms. Its face was completely inhuman, lacking a nose or mouth. In their place were 6 eyes on the face's left side and a field of thorn-like spikes covering the right side. Already, the temperature in the room had plummeted and Asia was feeling uncomfortably chilly. "The Eternal Ice Princess," the Belial woman whispered, her expression hesitant. With visible effort, she forced her expression back to confidence. "A neat trick. But you're fooling yourself if you think that'll be sufficient to stop me. What makes you think you matter?" Lavinia asked conversationally. "Demise-chan, cool their heels, please." The mammoth ice doll bowed and rumbled, and the entire room turned to ice, the walls and floor instantly coating over, and the temperature dropped to hypothermia-causing levels. Only the patch of floor around Lavinia, Rio, Riaz, and Asia was left unaffected. Cries of pain were suddenly heard behind the Belial woman as her teammates proved themselves slow to react and the ice shot upwards, congealing around them, leaving them immobilized save for their mouths and noses. A few tried to jump or take to the air, but Lavinia's eyes narrowed and razor-sharp icicles shot upwards instead, impaling them. "Wait," the Belial woman protested, casting her worthless ability at the frigid Longinus. There was zero apparent effect. "Have you ever studied a Longinus before, miss? Or the bearer of one?" Lavinia asked, a tone of genteel mockery in her voice. "Lavinia-san. Let me finish this." Rio's voice was chilly, a contrast to the azure flames suddenly surrounding her body. She loosened aim no Habari in its scabbard with a well-practiced thumb flick. "Wait," the Belial woman stumbled backwards, falling ass over to kettle across the ice. She pointed a shaky finger at Rio. "No one told me anything about a pyrokinetic or wait, is that a holy sword too?" Her tone, remarkably, was less scared than put out. She sounded almost like she were going to accuse Lavinia and Rio of cheating. "I suppose you didn't study me, either," Rio said, her eyes narrowed. She strode across the floor, Lavinia clearing her path of ice as she walked, and the Belial woman continued trying to scrabble her way backwards. "I'm tired of idiots like you putting my family and friends in your sights." "I'll back off," the Belial woman offered, trying to claw her way towards the door. "No. You won't." Rio's voice could have come from a sepulchre. She paused, as if to draw a breath, then lunged, her holy sword ringing out like a clarion as she executed a perfect Iaijutsu draw, her azure flames blooming around its cutting edge as she did so. The Belial woman didn't even have time to scream. The dull thunk as her severed head hit the ice was almost anticlimactic. "I never expected any of this," Asia admitted. She gestured to the imprisoned devils in the ice, grimacing. She regretted the fact that they were suffering. But she didn't regret that she was still alive, or that her mother and friends were. They had made their own choices, they had struck the first blow. At least they would live for the Kyoto faction to mete out justice. Lavinia had assured her that, between her magical mastery and that of absolute demise, they could be maintained in that state for as long as she liked. "I understand." Lavinia patted her arm. "Sometimes, that's the way Lady Luck dances." She had dismissed absolute demise back to wherever she kept it stored. "Go ahead and try out that spell now. We may need it while we're on the move." The former nun gave Lavinia a wan smile. She inhaled, let out half the breath, and concentrated. It was the same every time, Lavinia had said. That was the beauty of being a magician, she had said. The equations held true each time, just like a finely crafted machine. She ran through them in her mind, an action becoming easier with each repetition, and finished exhaling. There was a rush of air around her as a teal magical circle flared to life around her, and she gritted her teeth as a breeze suddenly skirled upwards, threatening to push up her dress. That sensation passed almost immediately and was replaced by visible air distortion around her hands and arms. She could sense the aerokinesis at work, ready nay, eager. To be manipulated as she commanded. She narrowed her eyes, and the air distortion shaped itself into a translucent longbow. She leveled it, knocking an arrow comprised entirely of air distortion. "Very good, Asia," Rio said approvingly. Her family's pyrokinesis cloaked her like a blue-white aura, but she had returned aim no Habari to its scabbard. "I've alerted my friends in the Kyoto faction, and they're sending people to make sure the neighborhood and the shrine are safe, but we should probably give them a hand." "Very good indeed," Lavinia agreed. "You'll find Galero to be almost perfect for you." The senior magician gathered the testing materials, shoving them into some kind of pocket dimension. "You're right about leaving, though. If they've tried striking here, heaven only knows what they're doing to the rest of the city. We had better move before they strike here again," Riaz agreed. The Belial woman's death had restored her power of destruction. Now, it wreathed her hands, scarlet-limbed with black, and she narrowed her eyes slightly. "The longer we stay, the more danger the people here will be in." Rio nodded sharply. "Let's move. Asia, stick close to Lavinia-san. Ria-san, I would appreciate you taking point. I will bring up the rear." The younger women nodded, apparently grateful for the presence of an older, wiser figure. After a moment to arrange themselves, the four women left the frigid requiem of the practice room. The only sound inside was the faintly audible breathing of the captives. Any word on the strike against Ria's Gremory? None yet. Sinan Belial said she would be running under communication silence until she'd been dealt with. Understood. Strike Team 2. We have eyes on Sona Sitri and her fiancé. Strike at your first opportunity. If you can actually capture or kill them, that's desirable, but sowing chaos is the primary goal. Afterwards, Issei was never able to explicitly define what made him react. A glint of light against the window, the brief flash of light from a magical energy bolt, Sona's or the silver-haired girl's eyes widening slightly. He was too busy reacting, pushing Sona to the ground and yelling get down. As the windows and glass doors exploded inward, blackish-purple streaks of light snarling through the empty frames at their heads. Even at that, Issei had almost been too late, and he hissed as he and Sona were peppered with broken glass. Everyone in the cafe was reacting similarly. Even Miss Silver had hit the deck, although her face didn't share the same terror-stricken or shocked expressions of the other customers. No, it was more a poorly suppressed, slightly manic smile. Like someone had just given her the excuse she'd been wanting to slap them silly. The minute the first devil entered the cafe, smirking and a magical circle turning lazily in front of him, she surged to her feet, screaming. Her fist slid up under the magical circle, connecting with his jaw at full force. The crack as his jaw shattered could be heard throughout the restaurant. As he reeled backwards in agony, she kicked his temple with enough force to snap his neck. He sank bonelessly to the ground, face frozen in a rictus of pain. She spun to face the next devil, just in time to see a blue-white explosion take his head off. Blinking, she whirled around to see Issei, his face radiating quiet rage, both hands shaped into finger guns and wreathed in blue fire. He fired his left hand, and the devil who had just entered was blown back through the door, his torso a bloodied and scorched mass. There were others appearing outside the cafe, murder in their eyes, but they were suddenly sent flying by a massive serpent comprised entirely of boiling water. The hydrokinetic manifestation slammed into them again and again until they lay still in the street, steam wafting off of their half-boiled figures. It then surged into the sky and dissipated with a thunderclap, subjecting the neighborhood to a brief but violent downpour. Nice save, Issei said softly to Sona. She gave him a slight wry smile, letting the magical circle around her hands wink out, and stepped over to the counter. The manager was huddled miserably, looking like he was on the verge of a stroke. Do you have an office here? She said firmly, an undeniable note of command in her voice. The manager bobbed his head in agreement, looking terrified. Take everyone here and hide in there, she said. In 10 minutes, call the police. Right. The manager squeaked and rose to his feet, starting to gather the other employees and patrons. Once they were out of sight, Sona turned back to Issei. We need to get moving before they attack again and put anyone else at risk. Issei nodded firmly. Wonder what the hell is going on. They heard the sound of a throat being cleared and looked back at the silver-haired girl, who was staring at them in surprise. You're not normal humans, she stated rather than asked. You don't seem to be either. Sona replied, beeping her head. No, I'm not, Miss Silver replied, clearly in no hurry to elaborate. She looked at Issei again, her expression an odd mirror of his earlier, speculative one. There is something oddly familiar about you. I don't believe we've met before, though. Her nostrils flared again, as if trying to place a half-remembered smell, and the pieces fell into place for Issei. I get it, he said, surprised. I know what it is about you. I think it's best we discuss this as we move, Sona urged. Issei nodded and half-ushered Sona to the door. Halfway through the doorway, he turned back towards Miss Silver. You coming? The silver-haired girl quirked an eyebrow upward in bemusement, but followed them. So what is it about me? She asked. Sona also looked curious, although it was a more distracted curiosity as she swept the streets with her eyes. You smell like a dragon, Issei said bluntly, and both girls looked at him in surprise. He pushed ahead with his explanation as they walked, looking more at Sona than at the silver-haired girl. It's something I only realized recently. Tucson and Saji, their scents are completely different, but at the same time, there's some kind of underlying similarity. Less in the actual scent, more like I have a hard time explaining it. I'm picking up that same kind of underlying spiritual scent, I guess. Anyway, that's what I'm getting from her. But Saji-kun isn't a dragon, Sona pointed out. Are you saying that dragons and people with draconic sacred gears smell the same to you? That's what it looks like. Or smells like, I guess, Issei said with a sharp nod. He glanced back at the silver-haired girl and said, I'm Hyoudou Issei, by the way. And I'm Sona Sitri, Sona chimed in. She grimaced. I have a suspicion that those assassins were after me. Nice to meet you Hyoudou Issei. My name is Bali. She gave Issei a sharp nod and then offered the same to Sona. And nice to meet you as well, Sona Sitri. She shrugged. For the moment, I'll say that you're right about it being a sacred gear. Sona nodded, her expression dubious. We'll accept that. For the moment, anyway. She put a soft but unmistakable emphasis on the last 4 words, and Volley responded with a curt nod. Where to, Sona-chan? Issei asked tersely, blue fire still wreathing his hands. He swept his finger guns back and forth as they moved, looking suspiciously at everything that wasn't the 3 of them. If they have you targeted, they might have Ria-senpai in their sights. And that means Ka-san and Asia in the crossfire, and anyone else around them. I'll check in with Ria's. Sona was already summoning a communication circle. Ria's, she said crisply. Are you alright? More or less, yes, Ria's replied, her voice slightly over-controlled. Are you two okay? I'm guessing you got attacked too. We did. We took care of them and we're on the move, Sona answered tersely. I suspect you and I were the targets. I think you're right, Ria's answered. We have things under control at the moment and we'll be heading out as soon as we've helped secure the neighborhood. Lavinia-sen is coming with us, I believe she has a friend in Kyoto that she wants to meet up with. Ollie's brows knit, a reaction that was not lost on either Issei or Sona. Get some information on her friend, then, Sona recommended. Shall we meet up or stay separated? I'll contact you when we have a location and decide from there. Ria's paused and then added, I'm putting Ryo-sen on. A moment later, Issei heard his mother's voice through the communication circle. Issei. Yeah, I'm here, he replied. You and Asia are okay, right, Ka-san? Yes, we're fine. Asia's a bit shaken, but she's holding up well. Her tone was concerned. You two are alright. Yeah. We're on the move too, with someone else who got caught in the crossfire. I see. Ryo's voice relaxed somewhat. We'll keep you posted. I need to speak to Yusaka-san. Even if it's Ria-san and Sona-chan being specifically targeted, these idiots aren't exactly being neat about it. No, they aren't, Sona agreed. Which means that either whoever planned this is being very sloppy or that collateral damage is part of the point. We'll speak again soon, take care. Issei barely heard his mother's farewell. He was too busy biting his lip, trying to fight down the abrupt spike of rage. Bastards trying to kill his wife, his family, not caring who else gets hurt in the process. Anada. Focus. Sona's calm tone hit his fiery anger like a bucket of water. He blinked, his eyes shifting to meet hers, and she was already wearing her king's face. I don't blame you for being angry right now, but random destruction just puts us on their level. Keep your head clear. Issei nodded jerkily, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Bali looked back and forth between them and shook her head. What the hell? Your sister was my friend's appointment. Both of them looked at her. You know Lavinia-san? Issei asked warily. Yeah. We both work for Grigori. I guess there's no point in hiding it then, and you two did save me. So, I guess I can trust you. If it's alright, I think I'll stick with you two until you find Lavinia. Issei and Sona exchanged glances again, and the latter nodded. That's acceptable. Do you mind if I ask what your sacred gear is? I do, actually, Volley replied coolly. If the day continues the way it has, I think you'll find out soon enough. Are draconic sacred gears that rare? Issei wondered aloud. Yes, Sona and Volley answered simultaneously. Volley gave the Sitri heiress a go-ahead gesture, and she continued. If a sacred gear has something spirit inside, it's generally something powerful. And there are only a few that have been outright confirmed to hold a dragon spirit. Remember when you called true holy swords a WMD in sword form? Draconic sacred gears are similar. 2 of the known examples are Longinus's, after all she looked like she wanted to add something, but clearly thought better of it. We'd better keep moving. The further away from the temples, the better. Nara, maybe. Issei suggested. Maybe the deer park. I can't think of any reason they'd strike that place. We might be able to catch our breath. Sona considered that for a moment and nodded. I don't see the harm in trying it. Ollie shrugged. Works for me. Sona concentrated, manifesting a teleportation circle, and the 3 of them disappeared in a flash of light. I think I may have miscalculated, Issei admitted. Just a skosh, Volley agreed in a sardonic tone, making just a tiny bit gesture with her thumb and index finger. Well, I agreed with it, so Sona said philosophically. Issei had been wrong about the deer park being exempt from the rampage. Already, they could see smoke and flames throughout the park and hear screaming. He ground his teeth. It was bad enough his family and friends were being targeted. But all these other people were getting hurt for no good reason. That spike of rage from earlier began to rise again, and he took a deep breath, trying to keep it under control. He felt Sona's hand on his arm and looked at her face. Her expression mingled support and calm, and he nodded quietly in thanks. Okay, I think I'm under control. Good, Sona said softly. Hey. Volley hooked a thumb over her shoulder, indicating a thick stand of trees. I'm hearing a lot of commotion over there. Seems as good a place as any to start. Issei beeped his head, listening. Volley was right, a lot of the most active noise and yelling was coming from over there, and there was a myriad of scents that direction definitely bore investigation. Let's go, Sona agreed. The three of them charged through the trees, emerging onto one of the large fields of grass where the Sika deer roamed. Sadly, there were a number of deer present who would never mug for treats again. From the looks of the corpses, their deaths hadn't been swift or merciful. Issei ground his teeth, shaping his hands into finger guns. His flame sparked to life again, but this time stayed under control, around his hands and forearms. Those responsible will pay, Issei-kun, Sona told him softly. She didn't look much happier. Issei knew she'd been looking forward to visiting the deer. The source of the noises and voices made itself apparent. A score of the surviving deer were huddled behind a young woman in Miko robes, with a half-dozen battered men and women beside her. They were half encircled by 24 devils, wearing robes emblazoned with garish devil iconography. From the way Sona and Volley stiffened at the sight, Issei suspected the sigils meant nothing good. I don't think they're gonna be able to handle them, Issei said softly. Fire was flickering around the Miko's hands and forearms, but she seemed unable to sustain it. In fact, both she and her companions, upon closer examination, looked exhausted. I agree, Sona replied. We'll help them. Ethics aside, this is a good chance to link up with the local yokai. Volley shrugged. I'm good with that. Let's not overthink it, though. Those assholes look like they're ready to kill. Sona nodded. Issei-kun, I'm going to draw their attention, and I want you to focus your fire on their spokesman. Stop it. The young Miko was cute as a button, with honey gold eyes and matching hair drawn back into a shaggy ponytail. Despite her diminutive stature, her expression and her voice were rock steady, with an unmistakable note of command. You have no right to disturb this place of peace, or kill these people and animals. Leave now, or face the consequences. The apparent leader smirked at her. He was muscular and husky, with a fully shaved head and a neatly trimmed goatee. He wasn't unhandsome, but the sheer haughtiness in his expression robbed his good looks of their effectiveness. He turned towards one of the deer still roaming unmolested and snapped off a bolt of demonic energy. The unassuming herbivore's head exploded like an overripe fruit, its body dropping to the ground. He turned back to the tiny blonde. Talk's cheap if you can't back it up, he replied. And you're all out of fire now, Kitsune-chan. But you do have something you can offer me. His eyes flicked up and down her body in a lascivious fashion. Are you sure about this, Callan? The question came from the female devil to his right, a comely woman with an Ouroboros tattoo on her left cheek and her lavender hair worn in a complicated series of braids. Shalba-sama said nothing about prisoners other than. Prisoners other than who? Sona's voice rang out, carrying a tone of amused sardony. She stepped into view, one hand resting languidly on her purse. Her expression was one of polite boredom. Issei was fidgeting from where he was concealed in the treeline. He did have a good line of sight on the leader, and he was really ready to kill him after what he'd done to the deer and the way he'd leered at the girl. Volley had excused herself momentarily, informing them that she had a surprise in store for them. Sona Sitri. The leader's voice dripped with contempt. The mousy bookworm reveals herself. Do you recognize me? Alan Belith, Sona replied. Don't you have a family business to be embezzling from? Alan's expression reddened, but he laughed her reply off. Don't talk to me about betrayed trust. Shrews like you should be grateful when someone like me pays them any attention. He adopted a mock thoughtful expression. I suppose we should add whore to that list of adjectives, shouldn't we? Is it true you've stooped so low as to bed some reincarnated trash? Issei nearly pulled the trigger right then. Only the fact that Sona was still in his line of fire stopped him. Yes, my fiancé is a reincarnate, Sona answered casually, putting a slight but unmistakable emphasis on the word fiancé. And he's 10 times the man that you are. She gave him a head-to-toe sweeping gaze and curled her lip contemptuously. Alan's face turned purple at the unspoken implication. With a barely controlled voice, he bit out, and where is this fiancé of yours? Billing you, Sona replied, her tone suddenly cold, and stepped to the side. The moment she spoke the last word, Issei started sending Rakutans downrange, aimed squarely at Callan. Alan actually managed to scramble backwards enough to rob the first firebolt of its full power. The next one caught him around his feet, though, mangling them into smoking meat and knocking him to the ground. The next one put him out of his misery, but Issei didn't stop firing until his body had been reduced to ashes. Sona raised both eyebrows at that. Her expression showed no disapproval, though, and she turned towards the other devils, summoning magical circles around her hands. Those began to writhe and swish with manifested blue-green water, waiting for her to shape them to her will. You've just seen the barest hint of my fiancé's abilities. I recommend you surrender now, before he gets really angry. Issei tensed, siding on the woman who'd been next to Callan. That seemed the likeliest candidate for a second in command. He'd like to think they'd be smart enough to surrender, but he'd encountered too many people in the supernatural world already whose gut response was to double down. He wasn't disappointed. The woman raised a hand, and purple-limbed demonic energy flared around her like an aura. "Kill the bitch," she shouted. The other devils surged at Sona with demonically enhanced fists and bolts of magical energy. The Sitri heiress responded by shaping her hydrokinesis into a massive meter-thick bubble, surrounding her, the Maiko, her friends, and the deer like a massive force field. The attacks rebounded from the water shield. Issei cursed and surged forward, closing his hands into fists. He was pretty sure he could take at least half those jerks, but the woman with that purple light worried him. And he'd never seen Sona manifest a water shield that big or that thick. He wasn't sure how long she'd be able to sustain it. This was gonna be dicey. "Got room for one more in this party." Volley's voice rang out from above, somehow amplified and rendered slightly vibrato. All eyes snapped to the sky. Above them hovered a figure in what looked like shining white power armor dotted with gleaming blue jewels. Extended from its back were two stubby white wing roots, with glowing wings of blue light extending from them. The gleaming armored figure landed in front of Sona's water shield, the magical attacks careening off of it and leaving little more than scuff marks. "This isn't even a light workout," Volley commented. "But I suppose it's best to extinguish the fire while it's small." The armor shimmered oddly in the springtime afternoon light and a voice boomed out. "Divide. Divide. Divide." The devils cried out in shock, seeing their powers and attacks first weaken, then gutter out completely. Even their leader was dismayed to see the purple light flicker out. Issei could almost feel the momentum shifting. "That's no." The woman cried out in anger and disappointment. "That's the hacker Yuku." "Haku then that's Issei trailed off." "Divine dividing." Sona nodded, looking unsurprised. "You mentioned draconic sacred gears, Issei-kun." This was the logical conclusion. Issei nodded. Somehow, he wasn't surprised either. He abruptly realized that Kallen's apparent successor was still in shock and he hurled himself at her, driving a flame-wreathed fist into her solar plexus with all the rock might he could muster. That, combined with the concussive and explosive force of his family's pyrokinesis, blew the devil backwards, her torso all but split in two. As she landed, her head lolled at a very uncomfortable-looking angle. Issei cracked his knuckles, his blue-white flames still dancing around his hands and forearms, and threw himself into the fray. 6 of the other devils were on the ground, incapacitated or outright dead, before the rest started reacting, but that did little to slow him down. Volley landed and started taking out the others with offhand ease. 5 minutes later, Nara Park was clear of hostile devils. "Are you alright?" Sona asked the young girl. The young Maiko nodded solemnly. "I'm just bruised. Please, see to my companions and the deer first." "Certainly. If you'll be so kind as to gather them here, I'll take care of everyone at once." As the Maiko gathered everyone, Sona gave Volley a good-naturedly sardonic look. "You do realize that we'd already guessed who you were." She had, Issei corrected. "I'm still learning about sacred gears." "And I hope you realize that I don't like to advertise the fact," Volley shot back, her voice just a little testy. "I'm not afraid of a fight, but endless grudge matches against people who are no match for me. There's no challenge in that." "Well, thanks for the assist there," Issei said. "That made cleanup really easy." Volley nodded. It was probably the way the light was filtering through the trees, but for a moment, she seemed to have turned slightly red. "Well, it was the quickest way to end the fight. You two would have probably been fine without me. It just seemed the efficient thing to do." "Of course," Sona replied politely. She saw that the Maiko had gathered well, quite a few people and animals, and smiled ruefully as she began the magical healing. "You were quite busy." "Kunu," the Maiko answered, offering a grave nod. "My name is Kunu." Sona returned the nod, then hesitated. "Kunu is your mother Yasaka-sama?" The Maiko looked slightly pained. "Yes, she is. Please don't make a big deal about it." She looked embarrassed, then added. "And you needn't be overly formal with me. Not after the 3 of you saved us, as well as the park." "As you say, Kunu-san," Sona agreed, then gestured to Issei and Volley. "My name is Sona Sitri. This is my fiancé, Hyoudou Issei-kun, and she paused, then continued, our friend Volley." "Pleased to meet you 3, Kunu said. "I'm grateful that you 3 were in Nara today." She grimaced. "I wish you had brought other friends to the rest of the city, though." "I've heard the name Yasaka before," Issei said thoughtfully. "And not in reference to the shrine, either." He looked questioningly at Sona and Kunu. "Yasaka, my mother is the leader of the Kyoto faction," Kunu replied, restrained pride in her voice. Issei looked suitably impressed. "Nice. I wonder if my mother knows her." "Who's your mother?" Kunu asked curiously. Sona couldn't help a slight smile. "Issei-kun's mother is the Akaji harem." Kunu's eyes widened. "Akaji, I see, the blue-white flames you were using, yes, Akasama knows her." I've even met her, but that was a very long time ago. Maybe that'll help us coordinate things, Volley interjected. Her tone was one of restrained impatience. No offense, but we know of at least 3 places around Kyoto that have been attacked, all of them by devils, and when they're walking around with those symbols. Yes, Sona agreed dourly. The old Satan faction. You and Senpai have mentioned them in passing before, Issei observed. The arch-rivals of the Mayu, or something similar. Yes, but more than that, Sona explained. They're the Mayu's predecessors and philosophical adversaries. All the stories about devils being evil and cruel, those have a basis on fact, but we strive to move past that as a people. They want to drag us back into that muck. She made a mow of disgust. They actually want to shift the conflict with the angels and fallen angels back to open warfare. They actually think they can win and rule the world. Or what's left of it. Issei's eyes widened. That's insane. Yes. They are, Sona told him. They also hate the evil P system and reincarnated devils. According to them, all of you insult them simply by existing. They never let you forget that, either, Volley chimed in, her voice carrying a surprising amount of bitterness. When Sona and Issei turned to her in surprise, she shook her head hard. I'm part devil myself. You've probably guessed that already. My family, well, they buy into the Os party line. Grigori looked pretty damned good to me after that. I'm sorry, Issei said sincerely. I can't imagine what that must have been like. You're lucky for that, Volley told him. Her expression was stony, but at the same time, there was something almost brittle about it. She cleared her throat. Now what? I hesitate to ask this after you've saved us, Kunu said diffidently, but my people and I could use your assistance in driving the Os out of Kyoto. As Volley-san said, they're attacking the city in force and not being careful about minimizing damage. Issei-kun and I will help, Sona said promptly. Issei nodded firmly. My mom and sister are in Kyoto right now. They're probably helping out too. I couldn't just leave them. Yeah. I have a friend in the city, too, Volley said, her voice still slightly rough. These assholes just made my shit list. I'm grateful, Kunu said, nearly sagging in relief. I believe we can secure the park without further trouble, and then we can return to the city proper. She sighed, shaking her head. This has been a terrible day, but at least you 3 were able to help here. Perhaps fate isn't entirely cruel. I don't believe in fate, Volley stated. Not the way most people do, anyway. The weight of a person's circumstances, the shape that their view of the world has taken as a result, that's fate. Not some nebulous force deciding everyone's path before they're even born. She smirked slightly, and for some reason, the sight of it sent an odd thrill down Issei's spine. And fate can be defied. Well, then, Issei said slowly. An unexpected hint of vanilla was in the air, and damned if he could figure out where it was coming from. Let's go throw fate in these jerks' faces. Sona smiled at him, nodding in agreement. Let's. There were many things Kuroka had half expected from the quiet invitation to Kyoto. Finding it under attack by rogue devils had not been one of them. The first sign that something had been wrong was a familiar face. Branmar Shax had been a family friend of her late unlamented master. Kuroka remembered him visiting the Nibirius estate on more than one occasion. She also remembered his idea of a good time and the side effects it had on servant girls. He was truly someone who would benefit the underworld most by absenting himself from it. What the hell was he doing in Kyoto? Shadowing him and the people he was with, an oddity in of itself. Branmar tended to rub people the wrong way, seemed the thing to do. For several blocks, it went without incident, at least as far as Kuroka was concerned. He and his cronies seemed more interested in causing property damage and marring historic sites with graffiti in the form of obscene devil iconography. Unfortunately, at least one of them seemed to be nearly as talented at magic as Kuroka herself was. Eventually, he realized they were being followed and cast an anti-illusion spell. Her illusion magic was momentarily forced down, and Branmar smiled that sick smile as he recognized her. Kuroka. What the hell are you doing in Kyoto, Naya? Kuroka said sharply. Taking a holiday, the high-class devil replied. You know, you could come with us. The Mayu may still consider you a stray, but my friends and I would be willing to make room for you if you're willing to make room for us. Kuroka fought off the urge to cringe at that sleazy innuendo. Sorry, I think I'm a little old to be your type. I'll make an exception for you. Branmar lifted a lazy hand, and the score of devils with him moved to surround her with equal laziness. All of them eyed her with haughty smirks, their expressions shot through with lustfulness. Kuroka felt a spike of irritation. She knew she was hot, but there were other things she was known for. It was amazing how people who should remember that seemed to forget. She let out an irritated breath and summoned a score of her signature, octagonal magical circles, each one crackling with purple-limbed lightning. She was going to enjoy this. There's an update, the aide said urgently. Ravel Phoenix and 2 of her peerage mates are in Kyoto. Observers have made visual confirmation. The Phoenix daughter is in Kyoto, the three people exchanged looks. That was a golden opportunity. Despite her youth, Ravel Phoenix was highly intelligent. It was widely expected that she would take over management of the house's business affairs when she came of age. The fact that she was the only daughter of the House of Phoenix was an added benefit. They would be desperate to get her back, a desperation that could easily translate into a steady supply of Phoenix tears. Or perhaps they could simply keep her and force her to produce the tears herself. Another three-way exchange of looks passed, and the woman nodded. Capture her if possible. I think we're being observed, Ravel-sama, Isabella said softly as they walked down the narrow street. Damn, Ravel sighed. She'd been feeling oddly twitchy for some time now, as if half aware of someone watching her. She'd hoped it was paranoia. Who do you think it is? Someone else from the peerage? Probably not, Ravel-sama, Mihi explained, chagrin in her voice. Whoever is observing us is trying to be discreet and subtle. And the three of us are the most discreet and subtle members of Riser-sama's peerage. She snorted and shook her head. No, if it was someone from the peerage, it would probably be Sharia ambling around in her Arabian Nights getup or Ayla and Nell threatening people with their chainsaws. Lovely. Ravel shook her head. What do you think they want? I wouldn't bet on it being anything good, Isabella said grimly. I recommend that we teleport out. Not directly to the underworld, they would anticipate that, and the power build-up for cross-dimension jumping can take time. But somewhere in the area, perhaps. Well, I did want to visit Nara Park again, Ravel let out a breath. Brace yourselves, ladies. On three. Someone's coming, Mihi blurted out. Indeed, a half-dozen men were moving towards them purposefully, having appeared right out of the shadows. At least two of them were armed, and the others had magical energies building up around them. 3. Ravel shouted. Her magical potential had already been prodigious, and her bishop piece only refined and amplified that. It was the work of a moment to shape a teleportation circle to Nara Park and to suck herself, Isabella, and Mihi through it. That should do it, Kunu said, a note of content finality in her voice. Things are as cleaned up as can be expected right now. Thank you three for your help. Of course, Sona said, nodding in quiet satisfaction. It had taken an hour, but Kunu's mother had managed to dredge up some reinforcements. The park had been confirmed to be OS-free, and the question on her mind now was where to proceed next. The distinctive light of a teleportation circle caught her eye. Her strategic beepasis ground to a halt as she recognized a sigil embedded in it. The House of Phoenix. What in the world? She held up a hand quickly. Wait, I don't think that's the OS. Issei had immediately tensed and called up his pyrokinesis. He lowered his finger guns, though his expression was still wary. That has to be Ravel-san. Can't think of any reason for the rest of her family to be here. The House of Phoenix, now? Volley commented, her expression one of polite boredom. She had abandoned balance breaker, but divine dividing was still visible on her back and she seemed prepared for a fight. Almost eager for one, Sona thought, and she wasn't sure whether that was a trait that all white dragon empresses shared or if that was all her. She really needed to reread the texts on the boosted gear and divine dividing. She's probably got company, though. Indeed, Sona agreed sourly, and a score of magical circles appeared in front of her. Boiling water swirled around half of them, and silver blue lightning crackled around the remainder. The teleportation circle winked out, and Ravel, Isabella, and Mihi came stumbling out. Isabella reached out to grab the ladder bishop, keeping her from falling, and she shot the rook a grateful look. Ravel had no trouble staying on her feet, but let out a long sigh as she relaxed her shoulders. It took her a moment to realize that she knew people who were present, and she looked incredulously at Issei and Sona. What are you two doing here? We were trying to dodge the old Satan faction, Issei said flatly. It didn't take. How about you? That must be who was shadowing us, Isabella mused. The old Satan faction. Ravel repeated in disbelief. What do they want with Kyoto? We believe they're targeting Riaz and I, along with causing collateral damage to damage our house's alliance with Yasaka, Sona answered. You were being followed, Ravel-san. Yes, and we were nearly attacked by. Ravel paused and made a deeply frustrated sound as another teleportation circle flared to life. This was supposed to be a quiet day for sightseeing, she complained to no one in particular. Golden flames erupted to life, cloaking her like an aura. And our date was ruined, Issei quipped. I'd bill the OS for damages if I thought they'd pay up. Sona cleared her throat loudly, doing her best to suppress a chuckle. Get ready. That's probably them now. The first thing that Ravel's old Satan faction pursuers saw when they emerged was their quarry, incandescent in rage and shooting phoenix fire at them. The two directly in her line of sight were disintegrated before they could even scream. The others scrambled to either side and were unable to regain combat readiness before Issei, Sona, Volley, and the Yaokai had them surrounded. Gunu gave them an imperious look. Despite her young age, she wore the mantle of authority well. Your people have done enough damage to Kyoto. I'll give you one chance to surrender." One of the devils looked like he was about to protest, but the apparent leader smacked him hard upside the head. He cleared his throat. "We surrender." The same would-be protester opened his mouth again, his face indignant, but he froze as he realized Issei had blue-white flames aimed at his head. Kunu eyed the leader imperiously for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Takahiro-san." The leader of the Yaokai reinforcements, a grizzled-looking Nekomata, stepped forward. "Your orders, Kunu-sama. Have these prisoners secured and prepared for transport to someplace secure. My mother will want to have a chat with them." Her voice was cool, almost matter-of-fact, and somehow, that seemed to make the OS prisoners more nervous than screaming would have. Sona approved of Kunu's methodology. The young kitsune turned back toward Sona and Issei. "It may be best if you head out now. If your suspicions about being the targets are true. Then perhaps we'd best stay on the move for now," Sona agreed. "As soon as you see your mother, Kunu-san, please bring her up to speed on our side of things. We're willing to help push the OS out of Kyoto, but under the circumstances, exactly how helpful we can be is debatable." "I understand. I thank you again for your help. Hopefully, I'll see you again when this is over." Kunu offered them a deep respectful bow, and Issei, Sona and Mihi returned it. After a moment, Volley did likewise, albeit awkwardly. Ravel curtsied in response, and Isabella offered a polite nod as well. Issei turned toward Sona, smiling wryly. "So where to next, since we're walking targets?" "For now, we keep moving," Sona replied. This was not how she wanted to spend her and Issei's weekend in Kyoto. She fully agreed with his snarky sentiment about billing the OS for the aggravation. That may be the best thing for the Kyoto faction if they're kept busy chasing us. Issei nodded firmly. It was touching how readily he trusted her judgment. It would be good to hone his own strategic sense, though. "It's probably time to start playing chess again," she mused briefly. "Makes sense to me," he said. "Maybe that'll keep them too busy to shoot the city up anymore." He looked towards the others. "Safety in numbers, right?" Ollie shrugged. "Fine by me. Like I said earlier, these pricks are on my shit list, and the more of them I get to fight, the better." Ravel eyed the silver-haired girl dubiously. She and her peerage mates talked quietly for a moment, then she looked up and nodded. "I think you're correct about being a target, Sona-san, and I think they have me in their sights as well. Most likely, as the key to gaining a supply of Phoenix Tears." "And those are?" Issei asked curiously. "They're a potion that can heal virtually any injury," Sona explained. "Ravel-san's family controls their production." "Phoenix Tears are the cornerstone of our wealth," Ravel agreed, a note of pride in her voice. "It's only natural that we keep them, and the secrets of their manufacture, under our control." She grimaced. "And, sadly, it's only natural that the OS would see me as a golden opportunity." "Well, stick with us, then," Issei offered. "Let's keep ruining their day. It's only fair after what they've done to ours." Ravel's lips curled upward slightly. "Yes, it is only fair, isn't it? With your permission, then." "Of course." Sona chuckled inwardly. The OS weren't the only ones to sense the advantages of a long-term, mutually beneficial arrangement. "Let's head out, then." They were never quite sure how word spread once they'd left Nara Park. But the moment they appeared in a quiet alley just off of Nishiki Market, they were attacked. The attack was short but fierce, with nearly 3 dozen devils or supernaturally empowered figures laying into them immediately. Of course, the attackers hadn't anticipated how much anger would enhance the assaulted party's power. And, when the assaulted party was comprised of 2 scions of the 72 Pillars, a pyrokinetic dragon, an experienced Rukan bishop, and the current generation's White Dragon Empress, the results were hardly unexpected. It wasn't until their opponents were dead or unconscious, with magical restraints binding them, that Issei and his companions could really take in the scenery. Issei had very vague memories of visiting Kyoto and Nishiki Market as a child. What he did remember was the shopping district being busy and energetic, full of interesting sights and smells. That was a far cry from its current state. It was all but deserted now, with more than a few bodies collapsed in stalls or over counters, most of them showing signs of having been killed with supernatural power. The scene made him sick and angry. Sona's expression was little happier, and even Volley looked displeased at the sight. "Bastards." The short, sharp obscenity came from Isabella. His fellow rook looked like she was ready to punch someone, and it took Mihi gently touching her arm to calm her. "This is really bad, Sona-chan," Issei said tersely. "Should we call Sarani?" "Let's keep that in our back pocket for now," Sona said. "It's not a matter of power, she has more than enough. But it's a matter of finesse, and she can sometimes be lacking in it when it comes to me and you, now being in danger." She shook her head. "One-Sama is one of the 4 most powerful devils alive. Using even a fraction of that power and anger would be enough to reduce Japan to a frozen wasteland." "You're exaggerating, right?" Issei's tone showed that he didn't expect her to be, though, and he sighed as Sona shook her head. There's something else you may want to keep in mind, Ravel commented. As with everyone else in their impromptu war party, she looked disgusted at the innocent dead. Both Serafal-sama and Surzage-sama are well known for their protectiveness of their younger siblings. The OSF might expect them to be called in and have something in mind for that. Both Issei and Sona gave the bishop an incredulous look and she raised a hand. I know, it's hard to believe that that'd have someone or something capable of threatening Amayu. I can hardly believe the thought. But can you rule it out completely? Sona let out an irritated breath. No. I can't. Powerful as one Isama is, there are still a handful of figures in the world who are willing and able to threaten her. And even that handful is too many for my peace of mind. Issei squeezed her arm. Then we'll handle this. We, and Ka-san in Asia and Senpai, and whatever allies we can find. Sona nodded and it was her turn to squeeze his arm. We can manage, Issei-kun. All of us have talents or powers. We're far from helpless. You're right. Issei clenched one fist, summoning his fire and examining its intensity. Still not back to full strength yet. He'd built up his endurance with it over the past month, but today had been way more strenuous than he'd expected. He let out a snort of resignation and nodded. Well, if we're gonna do this right, I'm gonna need ammunition. Bali raised an eyebrow. Ammunition. My sacred gear lets me control ferrous objects, among other things, the rook explained. I've worked up a special attack that combines that with electrokinesis. I need small ferrous objects for ammunition, though. Isabella looked up, surprised. You mean, something like a railgun? Yeah, pretty much the magical version of one. It was Issei's turn to look surprised. You're familiar with them? Isabella-san likes to read science fiction, Mihi said, her tone one of quiet fondness. It's a habit I picked up when I was in the service, Isabella explained. I'd be very interested in seeing this attack, Issei-san. I'd be happy to, if I can find some nails or something. He glanced around the abandoned shopping arcade. Does anyone see a hardware store? I have an idea, Sona said. You're kidding me, Issei said disbelievingly. They're ferrous, aren't they? Sona pointed out. Issei cast a baleful look at the package of hairpins and tried to levitate them. They slid neatly off the rack and floated obediently in the air. I will never hear the end of this if the rest of the peerage finds out, he said with a sigh, his cheeks pink. He plucked the package from midair and grabbed every package off the rack. What happens in Kyoto, stays in Kyoto, right? I won't say a word, Sona said with a good-natured smirk. I make no such promises, Vali said dryly. Ravel was trying hard not to smile, and Isabella and Mihi weren't even trying. Hey, if there was an actual hardware store around, Issei grumbled. The shopping arcade was all but deserted, but he left several 1,000 yen notes on the counter. Mihi had the idea to take a few minutes to catch their breath. She also suggested bolstering their strength with food from the deserted stalls. Sensible ideas in of themselves, but the moment they ventured towards the food stalls, more devils came out of the woodwork. It wasn't clear if they had been tracking or following them, or if it was just bad, stupid luck. They weren't pulling their punches this time, either. The minute they realized Ravel was present as well, they began focusing their attacks on her. Isabella and Mihi immediately leapt to her aid, and Ravel gritted her teeth and refused to back down, but they'd come loaded for bear this time. I thought they wanted you for ransom. Issei yelled. He leveled his finger guns, unleashing another double Rekadan, and grimaced as his flames sputtered and flickered afterwards. They hadn't had a chance to catch their breath, after all, his fire hadn't fully regenerated. Normally you don't up you the person you're trying to take hostage. I think they may have given up on taking me intact, Ravel called back, her tone wry. Patience isn't one of their virtues, and I'd heal pretty much instantaneously from anything they did to me. She unleashed her own pyrokinesis. If Issei's Rekadan was like a heavy slugger artillery round, Ravel's Phoenix fire was like a flamethrower or beam cannon. She sustained the flame, sweeping it back and forth like an assault rifle. A snippet from a half-remembered American pop song flashed through Issei's mind. That blonde, she's a bomb, she's an atom bomb. Rigged up and ready to drop. Why was he suddenly smelling yakitori skewers? He shook it off and sent a Rekadan at the next target. Sona and Vali had pulled out the big guns. Another massive water serpent had materialized, battering their assailants and blunting their attacks. Vali, meanwhile, had re-manifested her balance breaker around herself and was literally punching devils through the wall. Well, Issei thought, now's as good a time as any to find out if these actually work or not. Railgun. He snapped, leveling his hands with a flourish and mentally firing. The electrokinesis wreathing his forearms responded, sending the hairpin surging forth at somewhere around Mach 5. The effect wasn't quite as dramatic as the roofing nails would have been, but it was undeniable enough. The hapless devils caught downrange dropped bonelessly to the ground, their torsos shredded to bloody ribbons and holed all the way through. The remains of the hairpins embedded themselves in the parking garage wall, leaving streaks of blood and sinew dribbling down the concrete. Even having been slowed by the thickness of devil bodies, they left deep holes and spiderwebbing in the wall. His friends paused for a moment, regarding the results. The first one to speak was Isabella, who had paused in mid-punch just long enough for her opponent to try and wriggle free. She cold beeped him with offhand ease and said in faint admiration, "I'll be damned. That actually worked." Yeah, Issei regarded the bodies. He felt the typical brief flash of guilt at taking a life, but it was more muted than usual. That likely had to do with the fact that these devils had been actively trying to kill him and his friends. "Hey!" Volley shouted, her tone urgent, and waved a hand at the other devils. The Os devils were equally surprised by Issei's attack though, and they snapped out of it mere seconds after Sona and the others did. That wasn't enough time to grab the upper hand though, and they were quickly subdued. Sona let out a sigh and looked at Issei. There was no surprise in her expression as she gazed at him, just quiet pride that Issei had proven himself once again. "Let's go, Anada. We need to be on the move." Issei nodded sharply. "Yeah. Where to next, then?" Bali had a communication circle manifested and rotating next to her right ear. "Lavinia, do you guys have a clear picture?" "One moment, Volley. We're working on that right now." Lavinia glanced ahead and nodded at Asia. The younger blonde returned the nod, knocked her aerokinetic bow, and let fly with an arrow of distorted air, following it with 6 others. Each one arced high into the air. At the peak of its arc, each one split into a half-dozen smaller aerokinetic arrows, streaking downwards towards their targets with the concussive force of a pillared river. Their targets hit the ground, most of them now unconscious, and the rest so badly stunned that their lights might as well have been put out. Each arrow winked out of existence, leaving its target lit up with a faint pinkish glow. This last bit had been the result of adding another spell, one designed specifically for finding lost or abandoned things or people. "Well done," Lavinia said approvingly and shifted her gaze towards Rio. "I think that does it for this area." Rio nodded, her expression slightly distracted as she resheathed Dame Noa Habari. The past hour had been spent helping clear out the neighborhoods around Kiyomizu-dera. They were now preparing to teleport to the rendezvous site. "So Yusaka-sama herself will be present at this?" Riaz asked. Her power of destruction still limned her fists and forearms, although it was somewhat dimmer now, she'd been putting it to heavy use over the last hour. "It sounds like it," Rio agreed. "She and her advisors will want to put this to rest as soon as possible." "So is the shrine named for her, or is she named for the shrine?" Asia asked curiously. "Probably the former, but I've never asked her precise age," Rio replied. She chuckled in wry amusement. "It's probably best that you don't, either." Duly noted. Rio caught Lavinia's eye, and the younger mage nodded. She manifested a teleportation circle, lined with Grasshopper sigils, and the 4 women stepped into it. A moment later, they appeared in a quiet park in the Jion district. It appeared to be deserted. The 4 of them glanced around with narrowed eyes, leaning heavily on their supernatural sensitivity. After a moment, the air shimmered as a concealment spell was dropped, and a dozen yokai revealed themselves, gathered around the mouth of a cave that hadn't been there a moment before. The 4 women were conducted politely into the cave, where several score yokai were present, many armed and all looking ready for a fight. In the center of the loose assemblage sat a gorgeous, well-endowed blonde woman dressed like a Maiko, with a white haori draped over her shoulders and a golden crown resting atop her brow. She sported fox ears and tails, and her body language radiated calm authority. She sat on a wide tatami mat, large enough to comfortably seat 24 people, and stared down at an exquisitely rendered and magically self-updating, from the looks of it, map of Kyoto and its environs. A dozen senior yokai sat around the map with her, conferring quietly, and a cute blonde fox girl stood beside her, looking pensive. Rio bowed deeply, and her companions quickly followed suit. "Yusaka-sama," she said respectfully. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Yusaka replied, looking up from the map. She inclined her head politely to the pyrokinetic mage. "You look well, my friend. You remember my Kunu, I trust." She gestured to the girl standing behind her. "I do indeed," Rio replied, inclining her head to the younger kitsune. "It's good to see you again, Kunu-chan." She motioned to the young women with her. "This is my daughter, Asia. With us are Lavinia Rinai of Grasshopper and Riaz Gremory of the House of Gremory." She motioned to the younger women. "Pleased to meet you all," Yusaka said, inclining her head slightly and prompting quiet reply in turn. She gave Riaz a wry half smile. "It seems some people aren't enthused about our arrangement, Riaz-san." Riaz blushed. "I apologize for that. I should have anticipated this." "I should have, too," Yusaka admitted. "If the OSF is fighting this hard to disabuse us of the idea, I'm inclined to back it even more firmly." "So you've seen evidence that it's the OSF?" Lavinia asked curiously. "We had as well, but it's good to have confirmation." Yusaka nodded. A half-dozen reports confirmed it, including one from my daughter. She shifted her gaze towards Rio. Apparently your son and his fiancée helped her drive them from Nara Park. The Shiki market is cleared out now, Issei's voice spoke from the communication circle. His tone was one of quiet anger. They did a lot of damage, killed a lot of people. There may be survivors, but we haven't had a chance to check. Understood, Yusaka replied quickly, pitching her voice so that Issei could hear her properly. We'll get a team there as quickly as we can. Are you okay? Rio asked. Issei's tone worried her. Yeah. Or, I will be anyway, he said, the anger seeming to seep out of his voice. Quiet determination replaced it. We need to finish this. Now. Rio nodded. Agreed. We just need to determine the next step. Yusaka scratched her chin. I've been thinking about that. I have an idea, but it needs a question answered first. Whether they have a base in the local area, Rio said immediately. Lavinia looked thoughtful. Theoretically, it's not necessary with teleportation magic. But that's a very energy-intensive type of magic and difficult to obscure. Particularly when long distances or cross-dimensional jumps are involved. It would make sense for them to be staging out of someplace local. Yusaka motioned to the map. As you can see, we've been dealing with their incursion. We've managed to blunt or drive off most of their attacks, although not without cost, both to us and the city. She grimaced, clearly thinking of the loss of life. I don't think we can really expect further attacks, not on a large scale, but I can't guarantee that. Do you have any leads on this notional base? Rio asked. Yusaka opened her mouth to reply, but there was a gentle throat clearing. She turned to look at the ponytailed ebon-haired beauty standing behind her. You have something to share, Sumire-san. She said dryly. I do, Yusaka Dono, Yugashi Sumire said, offering Rio a polite bow. An acquaintance of mine just checked in. She believes she's found the probable base. Very interesting. May I ask who this acquaintance is? I believe she'd prefer not to have that shared right now. Yusaka muttered something that sounded very like that figures. Sumire offered her a smartphone, and the Kyoto faction leader accepted it, holding it to her ear and speaking softly to the person on the other end. Wonder what that's all about. Riaz wondered quietly. That's a good question, Rio replied. Something about her expression, though, suggested that she had an idea. Yusaka finally hung up, handing the phone back to Sumire. I think we have it. There's an old, mostly abandoned middle school on the outskirts of southeastern Kyoto. Communications from the local miner Kami confirm sightings of at least a dozen of the devils we have captured. Those captives confirm it from their end, too. So your theory's correct, then, Asia said thoughtfully. It makes a certain amount of sense, Rio commented. They've brought in a fair number of people, but not nearly enough to overrun the city, and they've clearly failed in the attempts against Sona-chan and Ryasan. They're operating on a limited budget, with limited numbers. We're moving on Yaoji and priests into the area now, Yusaka explained. They'll attempt to ward the school grounds against further cross-dimensional jumps. She grimaced. It'll take a lot of power to do so you'll forgive me if I'm distracted for a while. Naturally, Rio said, inclining her head respectfully. With your permission, we'll head over with them to help handle potential messes. Thank you for the offer, but I'd like you to stick around for now, Yusaka said. In order to both defend the vital points in the city and stage an assault against the school, I've stripped my security down to below the minimum. She looked at Rio. The presence of the Akaji Haim would go a long way to make up for that. Rio smiled. I'd be honored. Can I pass the base's location on to Issei and his friends? I think they'll want to help with that. Yusaka nodded. Please do. Thank the Kami for consistent personality traits, Kuroka thought. Branmer had been stupid, as well as arrogant. His phone had been on his person, complete with chat and text logs and GPS data. He wasn't going to need his wallet anymore, either. Kuroka was going to treat herself to a nice steak or two later. The fight had been tougher than she'd expected. Not with Branmer, he had barely managed to get a surprised look on his face before she'd taken his head off. The devils with him, though, they had been both ready and able to fight back. Especially that lithe little Balam, she hadn't expected his haymaker, and that had nearly spoiled the whole deal. Under other circumstances, she'd have smiled and called them worthy opponents. Today, she had just seen them as obstacles. It was possible some of them had survived. She had been a little profligate with her spell slinging. It hadn't been a fight with precisely balanced attacks, it had been one to hit her opponents with the biggest metaphorical hammer available and keep hammering until they were still. But they'd been quiet and still when she walked away, and that had been the important thing. It had been easy to find where Branmer and his friends, if they could be called such, had been hanging out. The middle school in Kyoto's southeastern outskirts had been closed for nearly a decade. It had only been the lethargy of city politics that had kept it from being sold off. It would have been easy for the OST to claim as a base of operations, and that was apparently what had been done. Kuroka smiled to herself as she approached the school grounds. She could already sense the local yokai starting to form a perimeter around the campus. She could also see numerous devils, in varying stages of disrepair and injury, falling back to the school. As for herself, she strode right in at a steady ground-eating pace, her expression suffused with affronted rage. Not that anyone present knew it was her face. Currently, she wore the visage of Branmar Shax. Illusion magic was such a beautiful thing, particularly when you were well acquainted with the owner of the false face you wore. When you were dead set on wiping out a group of murderous assholes, you needed every edge. She'd save her magic for when she had as many devils as possible within the blast radius. Well, we have the location of their base, Ravel mused. So what do we do with it? Call me obvious, but I think attack it is a pretty solid option, Volley snarked. Somehow, Divine Dividing's balance breaker could retract its faceplate, and she'd done that very thing right now. It was odd how the magical power armor only made her look more beautiful, Issei thought, and then tried desperately to suppress the thought. It's a matter of how, Volley-san, Ravel snarked back. She seemed to be on the verge of a pout. It was a really bad time for Issei to think about how cute it was. The Kyoto faction may be tightening the noose around it, but that's of limited help. If they have any sense at all, they've warded the site against any teleportation magic that they're not using, so we can't infiltrate that way. A frontal assault would be foolish, even with all of our talents, chances are good that some or most of us would be injured in the process, and we have no idea what we'd encounter inside. A long-range attack with magic, Mihi suggested. Between the two of us, Sona-sama and perhaps Issei-san, we could muster an appreciable amount of offensive magic. That has some merit, Sona said. But they'd be foolish not to have anticipated that possibility, too. We'd have to really pour it on to overwhelm their defenses, and we'd have to do it from as long range as possible. I'm game for that, if you two are. I have an idea. Everyone turned to look at Issei, who looked uncharacteristically diffident. It's a silly idea, he said hurriedly, but I think it'll help. I don't want to use my pyrokinesis. I want to use my railgun attack. It's quite useful, even with those hairpins, but I don't think those will be of much use against their base, Ravel said. Larger ammo, he said. This'll take a minute to explain. I've been working with one of our bishops on improving my control with electrokinesis. I think I can use it in my dragon form, and if I can, that means I can use it with much bigger objects. Artillery scale? Sona asked. Issei-kun, to get that kind of effect, you'd need I-beams or something similar. That's what you're thinking of? Yeah. Issei nodded firmly. As part of your long-range bombardment. Or maybe as a follow-up, get them thinking we've thrown everything at them, relaxed their guard. Silence returned, but this time it was thoughtful, creative silence. Sona broke it. It would be even better if we'd collapsed their shield at least once. Get them to pour their remaining energy into putting up another one, knock that down, make them think we're exhausted too, she snapped her fingers. And then you strike, Issei-kun. How do we get the shield down the first time, though? Mihi asked. Divine Dividing, of course, Sona said easily. All eyes shifted towards Volley, who grinned. What the hell? I've never used a magical shield as a punching bag before. This might actually work, Issei said thoughtfully. Well, we know they won't be expecting it, Volley commented. Even if we're doing this from maximum range, though, you'll need someone to keep your back covered. I was hoping you'd be willing to do that, Issei answered. Volley shrugged, glancing away. Yeah. I can do that after the first shield goes down. It'll probably be the only action to get up in the sky, anyway. Unless JASDF patrols get curious, Mihi said wryly. It's probably best if you don't punch any fighter planes out of the sky. Now that sounds like fun, Volley said thoughtfully. I wonder if that would even work. Maybe another time, Issei said hurriedly. Sona-chan, Ravel-san, Mihi-san, once your bombardments are done, I think I'll need help with this. Aiming and fine-tuning the electrokinesis, mostly. Of course, Sona said with a nod. Ravel nodded enthusiastically, and Mihi gave a graceful nod of her own. I'd better get down there, Volley said. Her lips were curled upward slightly in a smirk. I'll be real obnoxious about it, too. Leave them with no doubt about the situation they're in. Psychological warfare, Sona mused and smiled slightly. I like it. Now all we need are the I-beams, Isabella reminded them. Your friends need what? A half-dozen steel I-beams, Kunu repeated, her own expression somewhat dubious. Issei-san said something about using them as part of a long-range magical attack. Isaka raised both eyebrows, turning her gaze towards Ryo and Rias. Do you two know what he's talking about? Yes, Ryo assured her. At least I think so. It's probably a scaled-up version of his electrokinesis with ferrous ammunition attack. That seems likely, Rias agreed. His normal version of the attack is fairly powerful. Suitably scaled up, this could probably level a city block. especially if it's being used together with Sona's magical expertise. Misaka rubbed her forehead. Magical artillery. In my city, even if it's being used to save my city, she sighed, nodding. Kunu, tell Issei-kun we'll have them ready shortly. Also tell him to be very, very careful where he's aiming those things. Yes, Akasama. The I-beams were right where Kunu had said they'd be. Neatly stacked in an abandoned parking lot several blocks away from the OSF base. The local yokai were already using the lot as a staging area for their containment operations and had been effusive in their gratitude towards Issei and his friends for helping Kunu retake Nara Park. Getting them off the ground had been interesting. I-beams were easy enough for devils to lift, but doing so with multiple and maneuvering in the air with them gave new meaning to awkward. In the end, Issei had to actually assume his dragon form and use unknown dictator to glue the I-beams to his side. Even that made gaining altitude extremely tricky, and Isabella hovered close in case he began faltering. That sacred gear of yours is pretty handy, the other rook noted. I'm impressed you're managing to get airborne with those. You know, so am I, Issei answered. His tone of wry amusement carried over into a dragon's voice surprisingly well, despite sounding like a muffled peal of thunder. If I try this again, I need to come up with a better way of carrying ammo. We'll work on something during the summer, Sona called out. She was sticking extra clothes as well, but conserving her strength for the magical bombardment. We're here, Ravel announced, pitching her voice so that she could be heard clearly. 2 kilometers. I don't think we can risk higher. She was looking slightly nervous about being this high up. Issei couldn't blame her, he hadn't flown this high before, either. Agreed, Sona announced. Issei-kun, go ahead and get set up. Ravel-san, Mihi-san, let's begin. She moved both hands in an invocational gesture, and magical circles inscribed with the Sitri sigil appeared around her. There were only 24, but from each of them emerged a massive water serpent, each one the size of a tour bus and comprised of boiling water and rippling electrical current. Her expression was starting to become weary, and Issei winced internally. His fiancée had been slinging a lot of heavy-duty combat magic this afternoon, and it was starting to show. Ravel nodded, her expression shifting to one of determination. She made her own gestures, and 50 magical circles bearing the phoenix sigil popped into existence around her. Each of them was wreathed in white gold phoenix fire, and they almost seemed to pulse with the flickering flames. He pursed her lips in thought, and 40 magical circles flared to life before her. Each of them crackled with silver-blue lightning, which would help Issei in the next phase of the attack. For his part, Issei carefully curled himself into a series of coils, wrapped around 2 of the I-beams. With painstaking care, he shifted the rest of them towards Isabella. His fellow rook grimaced, but took the remaining ones with as much grace as she could muster, holding them carefully. 5 minutes, or whenever the shield collapses, Sona declared. They had already worked out beforehand how long they could sustain a heavy bombardment. Then Mihi-san falls back to help Issei-kun, and we cover him. They nodded, and she returned the nod. Ready, aim, fire. She hurled forth her water serpents before she even finished the last word. Well, crap, Naya. Kuroka stared up at the armored white figure hanging in the air. Glowing blue wings radiated from its back. She wasn't the only one in the schoolyard staring upwards in shock. She knew exactly what that meant. There had been rumors about the current White Dragon Empress, but almost all of them had focused on her beauty and bust size. Not one of them had mentioned the little fact that she'd achieved her beeping balance breaker. Just what the hell do you want? She asked aloud, well aware that she wouldn't receive a verbal answer. All at once, the figure surged downward, slamming an armored fist against the magical barrier enveloping the middle school campus. The fist struck with enough force to make the shield ripple and reverberate. Then a voice boomed out, one that sent chills down the Nekashu's spine. Divide. 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 The shield started rippling again, and this time it kept rippling. Kuroka could see its hazy light start flickering and fading. Divide. 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 The chant went on, and the shield visibly trembled and warped. The white armored figure reared back, its wings now blazing so brightly that Kuroka's eyes stung, and drove its fist back down, and the barrier bent inward and shattered with a sound like exploding porcelain. The magical backlash pulsed downward, shaking the school buildings and blowing out the windows. Kuroka was knocked ass over to kettle as well. If not for illusion magic, she'd have given someone quite a show. Wait, that's not, she started to say as the sky lit up again. She glanced upwards and regretted it immediately. That was the kind of massive magical barrage even she would envy. The Hakuryuku darted away, climbing rapidly in altitude, and it occurred to Yusaka that that was actually pretty sensible. The OSF devils in the schoolyard frantically tried to raise another barrier, but they were still stunned and wounded from the last barrier breaking. What they managed as a replacement was patchy and riddled with holes. It wouldn't last long. Cursing, she hurled herself at the main building's double doors. She barely made it inside before the combined hailstorm of lightning, phoenix flame, and electrified water struck. The observers on the scene had scrying spells directed back towards Osaka so she and her advisors could watch. Everyone present was watching as the bombardment rolled in, grim satisfaction on everyone's face to some degree. Even Asia watched with a kind of quietly vengeful contentment, though she had the good grace to feel bad about it and pray for forgiveness later. Credit where credit was due. The OSF magicians did their damnedest to keep the new barrier up. Sadly, their work was in vain. The new shield was weak from the beginning, and the bombardment involved an experienced bishop and 2 high-class devils who were extremely powerful magicians. At the 60-second mark, the barrier popped with a sound like shattering glass, and once again the school buildings trembled and cracked. No one who'd been in the schoolyard when the second shield fell survived. The bombardment ceased. An eerie calm hung over the ruined campus, one that fooled none of the observers. Tanir Oriax growled to himself. This day had not gone as he'd expected. He had been part of the old Satan faction for nearly a century, just after Prohibition had gutted his family's holdings in the human world holdings that he'd been responsible for overseeing. His parents hadn't been interested in the fact that his human contractors had been at fault, no, they had only wanted someone to hold responsible. They'd always been intimidated by his strength and intelligence, anyway, they'd just been aching for an excuse to make Male their heir. Male, whose only qualifications were a pretty face and being good with people. Bah. The OSF had welcomed him with open arms, quietly helping him repair his reputation to the point where he ran some of his house's businesses again. In return, he funneled them funds and equipment. One day, they promised him, we'll overthrow the Mau, and you can take your rightful place as the Viscount of Oriax and dispose of your parents and sister as you see fit. Tanir didn't expect to see that day come anytime soon, but he had plans in mind for it anyway. For Male, in particular. Then came today. His superiors, he didn't know their names, but he had suspicions, had promised that this was the first blow struck against the Mau to begin weakening their regime. And, as a senior cell leader, they gave him command of the staging base. He didn't have the freedom to run loose and wreak havoc like the others, but it was an important position, reflective of his importance in the organization. To be sure, the Yokai would eventually push them out, but at a serious cost, and he chuckled as he thought about Gremory and Sitri trying vainly to recover from the loss of their heirs. To say nothing of trying to placate Yusaka. Tanir allowed himself to indulge in a momentary fantasy of Kyoto's ruler, bound and kneeling before him, her clothing tattered ruins, as much at his disposal as Male would one day be. It was even more a fantasy now than it had been at the beginning of the day. The idea that effective resistance might rise up immediately hadn't even occurred to him. Or that the Yokai might find their base and take measures to trap them. As a result, nearly all of his junior commanders had either gone completely dark or were with him now, in varying states of injury. Numerous communication attempts had been cut off in mid-sentence, with the realization that most of the strike force had been either killed or captured. And Kyoto's magicians had laid interdiction wards, strong ones, on the entire area. Tanir was the most powerful magician present, and he couldn't even teleport across the room now, much less back to the underworld. The survivors were now licking their wounds in the school buildings, and Tanir was stuck trying to turn the afternoon around. The new shield is gone, his assistant said softly. Tanir shot the younger devil a furious look, and the fact that he couldn't gainsay his words only made him angrier. Against the walls, the handful of mostly intact devil magicians struggled to keep the walls from buckling. The assistant started to shrink back, but froze as a communication circle flickered to life beside his ear. Help. A voice shrieked. We're under attack. We know. His assistant snarled in reply. In the halls. The voice snarled back, now as much angry as frightened. Someone's in the school, cutting us to ribbons. Some bitch with cat ears. The assistant started to reply, his eyebrow rising in disbelief, but a blood-curdling scream sounded from the communication circle. It winked out with eerie finality, and at that very moment the shield popped like a soap bubble. A moment later, the building itself shook like a war god had struck it, the walls buckling and all the windows blowing out. Tanir stumbled and fell, his head bouncing off the edge of a desk, and he snarled in pain and anger. Most of the other devils in the room were in similar straits. The classroom door opened with a creak, and all eyes snapped to it. A beautiful dark-haired woman entered, a sardonic smile on her face. She had cat ears and a pair of black tails, and, barely, wore a kimono with a belt of large golden beads wrapped around her waist. I hope you don't mind me letting myself in ya, she said, her tone dust dry. You? Tanir yelled. Everyone in the room knew who she was. Nekashu bitch. Smile when you say that. She immediately burst into motion, an ebon hurricane cloaked in tauki and purple-black demonic energy. Most of the cell leaders in the room had already been injured, and the backlash from the shield's failure hadn't done them any favors. The woman had killed half of them before the rest could begin to react. All that did for them was cause them to die tired. Tanir hadn't even managed to pull himself to his feet when she did it for him. Her fingers curled into the front of his robes and she lifted him off his feet, looking at him with amusement. I think you'll make a nice present for Yusaka. He felt a chill creep up his spine as he remembered his earlier fantasy. Now the tables were turned, and in all the worst ways. Damn you, he tried to growl, but his energy was slipping away. The words came out as a whimper. Around them, the walls sagged slowly. That seemed a fitting summation of the current situation. That's your idea of bold words when being taken prisoner? How unoriginal, Naya, the woman said dryly. Tanir tried to spear her with a contemptuous look, but the energy wasn't there. He slipped into darkness before he could fully process why. Kuroka regarded the unconscious OS base commander with amused contempt. Shrugging, she draped him over one shoulder. She wasn't sure just why the bombardment had paused, but she had no doubt that it was only a pause. It was time to leave. Hold it steady. Issei rumbled. This was way harder than he had expected, but he was committed, and so were they. He concentrated and grimaced as his entire draconic bulk flickered with electrokinesis. Holding himself coiled like this around the pair of I-beams was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. Your mother says we're all clear. Sona shouted over the skirling air distortion and rumble of thunder. She was pouring most of her magic into boosting Issei's electrokinesis, and the result was putting them in the middle of a small supercell. Do it. She patted Issei's flank. Right. Issei shifted slightly. I need eyes, make sure I'm lined up. Up a little, Ravel called out breathlessly. Little to the left, little more, okay. She hesitated, then reached out, hesitantly patted his flank as well. She grimaced at the electric tingle. All lined up. Betting a little outnumbered here. Volley shouted, her voice amplified and rendered slightly vibrato by Divine Dividing's balance breaker. Quite a few OS devils had spotted and followed her skyward, and she was fending them off while trying to keep Issei covered. She was juking and dodging like a fighter plane, literally punching her opponents out of the air. Still, they were mobbing her faster than she could drive them off, and it was starting to reach a point where numbers would tell. Do it? Yes, please. Isabella agreed. Rook's strength and resilience made holding the extra I-beams aloft easy enough, but damned if they weren't still unwieldy. Having to hold them while dodging attacks was not a pleasant experience. He had no attention to spare and comment. Like Sona, she was boosting Issei's electrokinesis with her own, and her expression was tight and pinched with the effort. Right. Issei took a deep breath and then shouted with all his might, Ghost Dragon. He pushed as hard as he could mentally, metaphorically reenacting railgun's firing motion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the electrokinesis surrounding him flared a blinding golden white, and the I-beam streaked downward like a rocket, leaving a deafening sonic boom in their wake. The resulting Mach cone nearly knocked Issei and his friends out of the sky, and actually did that to some of their attackers. Seconds later, a massive explosion rippled outward from the point of impact. Load. Ravel shouted, and Isabella flew forward. She and Ravel guided the next I-beam into the makeshift barrel of Issei's coils, and he fired again. Another Mach cone rocked them, and another explosion rocked the deserted school grounds. Isabella was already reloading before Ravel could speak, and moments later another I-beam rocketed downward. By now, a thick cloud of dust and debris was covering ground zero. Issei sent the last pair of projectiles downward, kicking up even more of a mess. Sweet Kami, what was that? Kuroka whispered, staring at the dust-obscured crater that had been the middle school campus. Those last 3 strikes might not have been quite as powerful as the preceding bombardment, but they definitely pulverized the schoolyard. None of the buildings were still intact, even partially, and the main building's entire foundation had been vaporized. She suppressed a shudder and looked upward. Nekashu's senses were remarkably keen, and a bishop as powerful as she had easy access to magical enhancements. Even so, the site she sought was very high up, at least 2 kilometers. She could make out a draconic-shaped mass, curled around something, shrouded in electricity. There were several other things floating beside it, presumably other devils. A smile, mostly proud but laced with wistfulness, crossed her lips. Was that you, Ikin? She said softly. You've grown up, Naya. The urge to stick around and see him again was almost too strong to resist, but that would be a bad idea. Instead, she slung the unconscious Tanir Oriax over one shoulder. She knew exactly where to leave him for Yusaka's people to collect him. With that, she summoned a teleportation circle. As soon as she dumped Tanir, she'd have to run. And she still had to peek in on Shirin before she could rest. An elder sister's work was never done, after all. Not even when she couldn't reveal herself to them. Sona beeped her head, listening to the communication circle beside her ear. Your mother says that the OS base is destroyed. There appear to be no survivors. Issei let out a great shuddering sigh, and for a moment his altitude dipped. He corrected quickly, but not before Sona and Ravel both let out alarmed noises. "I'm alright," he said, a weary chuckle in his voice. "That took more out of me than I expected." Isabella relaxed as well, and so did Vali. The surviving airborne Os devils stared down at the wreckage of their base and beat a hasty retreat. They didn't get far before Vali caught up with them. None survived the encounter. "Let's get to the ground," Mihi suggested. Her elegant appearance was now looking slightly haggard. "Let's not press our luck." Sona nodded. "They're using a park in the Jeon district as their headquarters," she said. "That seems as good a place as any to land." They pointed themselves downward, shaping their course for that park. Sumire narrowed her eyes slightly, pulling her phone out. Asia watched her curiously as she spoke hurriedly and was somehow unsurprised by what she said next. "That was our informant. She captured the OS field commander and left him unconscious and bound for us." Her thumbs danced across the smartphone screen. "I'm tasking Katsuhito-san's raider team for retrieval." "Thank you," Yusaka said, her eyebrows knitting in bemusement. She glanced at Rio, and they exchanged looks that neither Asia nor Riaz could read. 5 minutes later, a lithe young man with cat ears and tails entered, flanked by a half-dozen similar such figures. They were dressed in dark grays and blues, and each one carried a daisho. The leader had a bound and unconscious figure slung over one shoulder, a long belt comprised of large golden beads wrapped tightly around his arms and wrists. The leader set the unconscious fellow at Sumire's feet and bowed. "He's fully unconscious, Sumire Dono. We made sure of that." He smiled thinly. "He's not carrying ID, aside from tattoos." Riaz peered at the figure, her face slightly pinched in thought, before her eyes lit up in recognition. "Tani or Oriax? I thought he was dead." "Apparently not," Yusaka said dryly. "Under normal circumstances, I'd offer extradition, but..." Riaz raised her hands. "Under the circumstances, it's only fair that you decide what to do with him. He's yours." Yusaka inclined her head in thanks. Motion from above caught Asia's eye, and she looked up. A moment later, she smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "Nai-san. Sona-nisan." Indeed, a large Japanese dragon, midnight blue in color and crackling with the occasional flicker of static electricity, was descending on the park, accompanied by 5 beautiful devil women. Just above the treeline, the dragon winked out of existence, replaced by an exhausted-looking Issei, whose shoulders were already drooping. Sona grabbed his right arm, and a blonde devil with twin drill tails took his left, and they gently glided the rest of the way down. Asia moved over to him, Rio and Lavinia close behind her. "Are you alright?" she asked. "You look like you've had a rough day." She realized that Sona was the only girl she recognized and offered a quick bow. "I'm Hyoudou, Asia, his sister. This is our mother, Rio." "I'm fine, Asia. Just tired." Issei's response was game but weary, and he leaned pretty heavily against Sona. The Sitri heiress looked as putative as always, but there was definite weariness in her eyes and expression. "Not much of a family resemblance," the silver-haired girl noted. There was no malice or challenge in her voice, just bluntness. "I'm Vali, by the way." "Hi Lavinia." "Hi Virginia-chan." The elder magician turned towards Asia. "This is the friend who came to Kyoto with me. Lucky thing she met up with your brother." "Ravel-san. What are you doing here?" Riaz came up behind Asia and was staring in surprise at the drill-tailed girl. "Hello Riaz-san." Ravel looked equally surprised to see Riaz. "My peerage mates and I were sightseeing in Kyoto. And you?" "Asia is going to be my contracted magician," Riaz answered. "We were meeting with her mentor in Grozobur." "Indeed you were," Lavinia said cheerfully. She waved a hand and a rolled-up piece of parchment appeared with a silver ballpoint pen clipped to it. She offered the paper to Asia. "I don't have any doubt about your worthiness to be part of Grozobur. Sign that, please." Asia blinked, staring at her in surprise for a moment, then broke out in a huge smile. "Thank you." She hurriedly unrolled the parchment, eyes flicking across the script first. Never a bad idea to check for fine print, she clicked the pen and scribbled Hyoudou Asia at the bottom of the paper. Her signature glowed a soft white gray for a moment. She realized that she was doing the same. Lavinia seemed pleased at that. She accepted the parchment and produced a neatly wrapped bundle of white gray cloth from out of thin air. She held it out to Asia. "The books I gave you have a spell for adjusting those to fit you. Be sure to wear them when working with Riaz-san." "I will." Asia promised. "Way to go, Asia," Issei said, trying to straighten up. He looked like life and energy were starting to return to him. "Congratulations," Sona agreed, offering a smile. "Thank you all," she replied softly, her shoulders drooping as the realization that the crisis was over sank in. She clutched the bundle tightly. It was almost as if she could feel her agency, her ability to live her life as she willed it in the bundled cloth. "Thank you for helping out today." Yusaka looked around the motley group and offered a deep and respectful bow. "All of you. The situation would have been far worse without your intervention." "We were glad to help," Sona replied, and Issei nodded firmly in agreement. It was no problem, Volley said with a shrug. I always enjoy a good dust-up, and those Osprix had it coming. Hyoudou is my peerage mate's hometown, Ravel declared. I don't like the idea of it coming to harm any more than she does. I second that, Isabella chimed in. Mihi smiled softly and nodded her agreement. Well, I think I'd better be off. Volley stretched and yawned. You don't need me around for the cleanup. You're off, Virginia-chan. Lavinia said, looking unsurprised. Don't call me Virginia-chan. Yeah. I need to get some air. Maybe we'll see you around, then. Maybe so. Take care, hi to Issei, Sona Sitri. She tossed the two of them a wave and walked towards the park's tree line, heedless of the surprise and indignation among many of the yokai. You probably didn't do yourself any favors right there, Lavinia mused conversationally. She had elected to see her friend off. It wasn't unusual for the White Dragon Empress to disappear and blow off steam after a particularly intense battle. What the hell? It's not like I plan on coming back to Kyoto anytime soon. Anyway, I think I'll just be in the way right now. Volley's eyes glanced towards Issei for a moment. Lavinia followed her gaze and smiled. You two seem to get along well. Volley shrugged. He seems like he'd be a good ally. He's good in a fight, anyway. She narrowed her eyes at Lavinia's smile. What? Oh, nothing. Have fun. Volley gave her friend a quizzical look, then shrugged. You too. Divine dividing. The wide and glowing blue wings sprouted from her back and she took to the sky. I suppose it's time we returned home as well. Ravel bowed, first to Sona and then to Issei. Sona-san, it was nice to see you again, she said formally. And it was nice to meet you, Issei-san. I as well, Isabella agreed. Mihi nodded and offered a respectful bow. Issei gave both of them a respectful bow. It was nice to meet all of you. He grinned tiredly. Hopefully next time we meet will be more peaceful. Yes, that would be nice, Ravel agreed. For some reason, her cheeks were slightly pink. She summoned a teleportation circle and it whisked her the three of them away. Issei stretched and rubbed his right shoulder, then got an odd expression on his face. He sniffed the air. That's odd. Sona looked up from where she was helping Asia. What is it? I could have sworn I was smelling yakitori, he told her. Strange. Yes. Strange, Sona smirked for a moment and exchanged amused glances with Asia. Issei decided it was best not to press for an explanation. Well done, Rio. Rio froze at the sound of that voice and closed her eyes briefly in resignation. She then turned to face the speaker, bowing deeply. Thank you, Oba-sama. The speaker returned the bow. Despite the honorific Rio used, she looked even younger than her natural form. She was an extremely cute brunette, apparently in her early teens, with her hair worn up in a Shimada-style hairdo. She was clad in a hamangi that greatly resembled Rio's. Her eyes shifted towards Issei and he instinctively straightened up. Rio cleared her throat. Issei, this is Daomen Genbu, your great aunt and the head of the Daomen family. Issei's eyes widened, but somehow, he wasn't fully surprised. At this rate, the real surprise would be meeting someone who actually was the age they appeared to be. He bowed respectfully. I'm pleased to meet you, Genbu-sama. Oba-sen is fine. We're family, after all. The woman's expression was serene and dignified, but he couldn't escape the feeling that she was deeply amused. This is the first time we've met since you were very young. You've done very well today, as well. Thank you, Issei said carefully. Ah, I should point out that Asia has, as well. And so has Sona-chan Air, my fiancé, that is, as well as our acquaintances Asia and Sona both bowed as well. Of course. Genbu inclined her head towards Asia and then Sona. I thank all of you for your efforts on behalf of Kyoto and our family. Please, let me extend our family's hospitality to you tonight. She smiled slightly. As I said, your family as well. Genbu hadn't been kidding about the accommodations. The Daomen family maintained a small estate in Ohara. It was virtually the platonic ideal of a ryokan, complete with an onsen. The hot springs even had a mixed bathing section and Issei and Sona were getting amused looks from the others as they settled in. Riaz and Asia were sharing a room, as were Rio and Lavinia. The blonde mage was making noises about temporarily relocating to Kuo to keep an eye on Asia's early career. The idea that Issei and Sona might room with anyone else seemed to have occurred to no one. Exactly where Volley had gone, no one knew. Lavinia seemed unworried, though. She probably went somewhere to blow off steam, she said blithely. Dinner had been traditional and expensive looking. Issei had never actually had a kaseki before, Goru and Rio's tastes ran surprisingly contemporary. But the traditional multi-course feast had been delicious and filling. He and Sona had nearly nodded off in the bath afterwards, too sated for anything more than the most cursory making out. Actually, this is pretty nice, Issei commented as they laid out the futons. Would you believe I've never actually been to a ryokan? No, I wouldn't, Sona replied. Not at all. Not that I can remember anyway, he told her. Maybe when I was really little, but I definitely don't remember it. It's a pity we don't have more time to soak it in, Sona said. Maybe over summer break. If not in Japan, maybe at the underworld. Ria's family has a rather large Japanophile streak, so they have quite a few onsen and ryokan in their territory. I'd love that, Issei said, perking up. Familiar and exotic. He finished setting up the futons and turned the blankets down. His eyes returned to Sona, and his smile was both admiring and speculative. You look great in a yukata. You, too. Sona wore a similar smile, and she scooted closer to him, leaning against him. He wrapped his arms around her, and she nestled closer. For a long time, the room was comfortably silent. Issei-kun. You awake? Sona said finally. Issei blinked. Wah, sorry, I'd started falling asleep there. He stifled a thoroughly undignified yawn. Sona chuckled. Why don't we take a nap, then? We've had a pretty busy day. Just a nap to perk us up. Smart idea, Issei agreed, not stifling the next yawn. With that, he flopped bodily back onto the futon, taking Sona with him. She actually let out a yelping laugh of surprise and bapped him lightly on the shoulder. A little warning, next time, if you please. Sorry about that. He yawned again, this one much deeper and louder, and pulled her close again. After a moment, she rested her head on his chest, her eyes fluttering shut. A short nap sounded perfect. I wonder how long they've been like that. I think they've been like that all night. Does Sona-san always make that face in her sleep? If she's relaxed enough. At least she's not drooling like Hyoudou-kun, Ria's mused. She wore a shit-eating grin, catching her oldest friend in such an unguarded moment was too good an opportunity to pass up. They look so adorable. Don't forget to turn the flash off. I know how to take a picture, Ria-san, Asia chided the red-haired devil. Now, hold on. She carefully lined up the phone's camera lens and snapped several pictures with the flash still on. I just told you, Ria started, exasperated, but the damage was done. Both Issei and Sona flinched at the multiple flashes, and Issei opened one eye sleepily. Wah. Sorry. Asia blurted out contritely. We just saw you two like that, and it was so cute. Wah? Anada, what? Sona groped around for her glasses, finally finding them and putting them on. They still ended up cutely askew, but that did surprisingly little to dilute her piercing look. Riaz, Asia-chan, what are you two doing in our room? We came to see if you were awake, Riaz said with a big smile. And to invite you to breakfast, if you were. It's a good thing, too, because we managed to immortalize this. She turned Asia's phone so Sona could see. Issei was still trying to nudge his brain out of sleep mode. There on the phone screen was a snapshot of Issei and Sona snuggled together while sleeping. Her face was half turned against Issei's chest, but an expression that was relaxed nearly to the point of being slack-jawed was visible. She still looked more dignified in her sleep than Issei did, however, his free arm was thrown haphazardly to the side, and his mouth was open in a big stupid grin, while drool trickled from one corner of his mouth. The photo subject pushed himself into a half-sitting position, stared blearily at the phone, and then his face became outright mortified as he realized what he was looking at. This will be my new wallpaper. I'm sure Akeno will want a copy, Riaz teased in a good-natured tone. Asia gently pried her phone out of Ria's hand. You two really are adorable together, Nai-san. Come join us for breakfast. Issei and Sona exchanged bleary-eyed looks, then shrugged. We'll be right down, the latter said. Now, if you leave so we can get dressed. Yes, Sona-san, Asia said in a placating tone. Ria-senpai, let's give them some time alone. Giggling, she left the room. Riaz followed after a moment, still smiling. Issei and Sona leaned against each other and shared a rueful chuckle. I really don't want to deal with them this morning, he said wistfully. Summer break, she reminded him. We'll find a place with a hot spring and rules against disturbing couples in the morning. I'll hold you to that, Issei answered and stifled a yawn. Come on, Sona said, standing carefully and reaching a hand down to him. He took it. You three are idiots. This proclamation came from a regal-looking man with silver hair and a goatee. He reclined in an expensive chair, sipping an expensive wine, while his three assistants sat on the uncomfortable sofa before him, looking chagrined. What were you thinking? We saw an opportunity to cripple Gremory and Styrie, the woman protested. She was in her true form now, a statuesque beauty with light brown hair and a bun and slim frame glasses. She wore a short curve-hugging dress with a plunging neckline. And to damage their alliance with Kyoto, interjected the dark-haired man. He was almost beautiful, his long raven hair tied up in a high ponytail, and he wore dark robes inscribed with devil iconography. We judged it worth a risk, the brown-haired man concluded. He wore a form-fitting suit of black body armor under a midnight blue cape. His handsome features were almost petulant. You judged wrong, the silver-haired man said, his tone now a thin knife flaying their spirits. The basic idea had some merit and you did cause a lot of damage, but not nearly enough to cow Yusaka. You didn't plan for how quickly they'd retaliate or how forcefully, either. And now Gremory and Sitri are cozier with Kyoto than ever. That is what your little brainstorm bought us, and all it cost was 15% of our active cells. The 15% worth talking about at that. He waited until the realization surfaced on their faces before softening his tone. Fortunately, this is manageable. In fact, it may even benefit us in the long run. The three stared at him. The woman found her voice first. Rizavum-sama. My sources tell me that the fiasco has now convinced the public and many in the pillars that our organization is incompetent and toothless, he explained. Not all of them believe this. I expect that, at least, the current Mao will be wary. But the prevailing public opinion is that we what is that charming human term? Screwed the pooch. He ignored their reactions of distaste at his usage of a human vulgarity. That means that most people will dismiss us as a threat. What are you planning, Rizavum-sama? The brown-haired man asked. Rizavum chuckled. There's another human term that's become relevant to me lately. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. In their efforts to ease devilkind towards a peaceful coexistence with the rabble and our ancient foes, the current Mao have disaffected not only us, but their would-be allies as rivals. I've begun speaking with them. Rizavum-sama. The dark-haired man shot to his feet in protest. You can't mean to ally with he trailed off as he began considering the benefits. Ultimately, true devils have no friends, nor even true allies, Rizavum said in a dry tone. But that doesn't negate the wisdom in cooperating with those whose goals match ours. He gestured, and a communication circle flared to life. No, the three realized in surprise, it had been active the whole time, merely obscured by illusion magic. Someone had been listening to them. Isn't that right? I couldn't agree more, a rough male voice replied, and the three of them stiffened as they realized just who was speaking. So much easier to determine the winner when all the chaff is cleared from the board. Makes the game more interesting. Just so, Rizavum said with a nod. Kateria. Shalba. Cruci. You three can go now. Our associate and I have some matters to discuss. The three assistant leaders of the old Satan faction stood up, still shocked, and left the room. What is he thinking? Kateria sputtered as they left the mansion. I think he's thinking about winning, Shalba said simply. Neither of his compatriots could rebut that. Ryo kissed Goro on the cheek. Stay out of trouble while we were gone. Sure. Just had some friends over to play cards. It better not have been poker, Ryo warned him. I still remember what your one friend did after losing. Nope. We just played Uno and watched the Belial rating game. He smiled at his wife, son, daughter, and future daughter-in-law. Welcome home. Did you guys enjoy Kyoto? Once the old Satan faction had been kicked out, yes. Ryo beeped her head, looking at the cloth grocery bag sitting on the counter. Are those? Yep. They were Tannen's contribution to the pot. Goro paused and gave Ryo a sharp look. The what the hell were they doing in Kyoto? His sudden spike of confused anger was an obvious cover for after-the-fact worry. Are you guys okay? Going after Riaz and I, Sona answered. They wanted to weaken our alliance with Yusaka-san. Don't worry, Goro-san, we were able to handle them. Everything's under control, Goro-kun, Ryo assured her husband. You can relax. Issei glanced at the apples, then gave them a second look. Those look really, really good. One of your friends have an orchard or something, too-san. Something like that, Goro said with a nod. He was already starting to calm down. Go ahead and try one. Issei eyed him dubiously, then plucked one out of the bag and cut it in half. He bit into one of the halves, and his eyes widened as the taste hit home. He turned to Sona. Sona-chan, give this a try. It's wow. Thank you. I've never actually had dragon apples before, Sona replied. She picked up the untouched half and took a bite. Her own eyes widened, and she said, yes, I think a wow is in order. Dragon apples are pretty special, Goro agreed. Some species of dragon can't survive on anything else. These aren't gonna have any weird effects on us, are they? Issei asked curiously. The question didn't stop him from polishing off his half of the apple with gusto. Not usually, Goro assured him. Most of what you'd feel is an extra boost of energy. He chuckled. You may have to stay pretty active today to burn it off before you turn in. I recommend taking a long flight. The Sea of Japan is really pretty right around dusk. We just got home, Issei started to say. I think your father has a point, Ryo said. Her eyes were on Goro's and she reached out to take one of the apples herself. I think I'm going to go see Kaori-san, Asia said quickly. Work on homework. She darted into the foyer. Your father's probably right about dusk, Issei-kun, Sona added, taking his hand. Let's go, too. She dragged the feebly protesting Issei towards the front door as well. Issei stopped in the doorway. The rest of the peerage were wearing shit-eating grins. Even Tsubaki's normally serene expression was openly amused. What? He asked flatly. So? Rhea was very nearly bouncing in her chair, a sight that Issei had to work to keep from ogling. Hairpins. He groaned, rolling his eyes towards the ceiling. Sona looked exasperated, but patted his back. Who told you? Hyoudou-kun told me, Tsubaki admitted. Rhea-senpai apparently told him. We saw the other thing, too, Tsubasa added, turning her laptop so they could see the screen. The web browser was showing a paused video on DeviTube, labeled Dragonfire's magical railgun. She tapped the touchpad, and the video resumed playing, showing Issei using Ghost Dragon on the OS base. I'm surprised someone took the time to record it. Issei gave Sona a half-apologetic look. It wasn't like he'd been trying to become famous on the supernatural internet. She smirked and patted his back again. Nothing happened in Kyoto for you to feel ashamed of, Issei-kun. Although I'm also surprised someone was able to record that. Apparently someone from Kyoto was able to upload it, Aika explained. They've got the city's CCTV network, or what there is of one, sewn up tight. Some of those cameras got some decent footage. Kaori nodded. That's a frightening attack, Ice. Anyone with a gram of sense ought to avoid pissing you off. Unfortunately, the underworld is full of people who lack even that much sense, Sona noted. She glanced at the DeviTube comments. You should take a look at these, Issei-kun. They're pretty complimentary. Those hairpins didn't seem to work as well as the nails, according to Rhea-senpai, but it sounded like they were effective enough, Rhea said thoughtfully. When you think about it, hairpins would be a lot easier to explain having at school, Kaori said. From her expression and tone, she was torn between joining in the friendly ribbing and trying to ease his embarrassment. That fact warmed Issei slightly. He decided he was better off not exploring why. I guess you and Kaichu had better start carrying them in bulk, Aika said, elbowing Kaori with a good-natured smirk. The knight gave her friend an old-fashioned look, and the pawn just responded with a knowing smile. Issei didn't notice. He was too busy leaning over Tsubasa's laptop and checking the comments. You're right. These are way nicer than I was expecting. I don't get all the hate on my shirt, though. Blue isn't his color, what the hell. Tsubaki cleared her throat. To be honest, Kaichu, we were surprised you stayed overnight. Things were under control, but I'd have thought you eager to be quit of Kyoto after that situation. The Daumon family wanted to express its gratitude, Sona explained. They had a small, local estate that they operate as a ryokan, and they put us up there. The Daumon. Tsubaki perked up in interest and nodded in realization. That's right, Ryo-san is a Daumon. Ha-san thinks we're cousins, Issei said dryly. She thinks I'm related to Himejima-senpai, too. Bakeno sneezed. Rhea gave her a concerned look. Are you feeling okay? I think I may be coming down with something, the elegant queen sniffled. Tsubaki chuckled. Well then, cousin, go ahead and call me Tsubaki. It would sound too weird for you to call me Nisan. She shifted her gaze back to Sona. A ryokan. Did it have an actual onsen attached? Yes, Sona admitted. Normally, the one in question is closed during the spring, but they reopened and staffed it for us to stay last night. She smiled. It was wonderful. Tsubaki bobbed her head, looking pleased. Her expression then sobered and her eyes shifted to Kaori. The knight reddened slightly and she cleared her throat. Kaichu, something happened while you're gone. I don't think it's going to blow up, but we should discuss it. Sona raised her eyebrows. All right. What's going on? She was summoned by a Kuo student, Tsubaki explained. Sona froze and Issei couldn't blame her for the sudden wariness. That wasn't unheard of. In fact, he knew that Rhea's peerage had amassed a small network of students who were regular customers, but this was the first time it had happened with Sona's peerage. It would be a major pain in the ass to deal with someone who thought they could blackmail her. Who is it? Hada Yui, Kaori explained. My best friend. Hada summoned you? Issei said, surprised. How'd she take it? Shocked, Kaori admitted. Not angry. More concerned for me. I can see that, Issei admitted. She's always been protective of you. She's still looking at me suspiciously when we're at practice. That's at least partly criticism of your technique by now, Kaori said, smiling slightly. But yeah, I think her main concern is that I'm not unhappy or being abused. It's good of your friend to worry about you, Sona said thoughtfully. Why don't we meet with her? Perhaps we can assuage her fears. It's worth a try, Kaori answered, shrugging. I don't think she'll do anything stupid, but I'd like to make sure she doesn't. And that she doesn't get herself hurt, either. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this, Kata said 2 days later. She and Kaori shared a karaoke booth with Issei, Sona, and Tsubaki. Nor was I, although I probably should have, Sona agreed. Less for you yourself, Kata-san, and more for the potential for anyone at school to summon a member of my peerage. Hadis nodded, her expression politely dubious. She turned towards Issei. How long have you known about all this, Hyoudou? Were you always a devil? Issei was tempted to give a smartest reply, and he was sure that urge was apparent on his face. With some effort, he answered instead, nope, I've only been one for about a month. I've known about them for maybe 9 months. I learned about devils when I accidentally summoned Sona-chan one night. Summoned her for what? Caddis's suspicion seemed to spike at that admission. To keep him awake and focused while programming, Sona answered. Our interactions were entirely chaste prior to our engagement. Caddis considered that, her expression now somewhere between skeptical and thoughtful. And now what? She finally asked. Is this where my life is in jeopardy if I don't join up or sell my soul? But grief, no. Sona sounded exasperated, the tone of an affronted professional. Issei knew her well enough to also hear the affronted sense of someone who held herself to a high ethical standard, as high of one as a high-class devil could maintain, anyway. For Sona Sitri, that was pretty damned high. Yui, trust me, Kaori interjected. If she'd wanted to harm you, you'd be dead already. She grimaced. And probably me as well, for creating the situation. No one's harming anyone, Issei added quickly. Quite right. Sona took a sip from her iced coffee. The only thing we ask is your silence. That's all. Caddis looked dubious again. I won't lie, I'd be happy to have another Kondoka in my peerage, Sona admitted. But I don't like compelling or misleading people in order to recruit them. Caddis's eyes cut to Issei, and Sona's expression sharpened in response. No, Caddis-san. That is not what happened, and I don't appreciate the insinuation. It insults both Issei-kun and I. Both Kaori and Caddis blinked in surprise at the unexpected sharpness in her voice. Okay, Caddis trailed off, still surprised at the president's strong reaction. Sorry. I'm used to thinking of Hyoudou as ya. I'm used to people being skeptical about me cleaning up my act, Issei said with a shrug. But yes. Sona's calm reasserted itself. Your silence is all I ask. Perhaps, as you get to know the supernatural world, you'll see the benefits of being a devil. Or perhaps our allies will have something to offer you, and you to offer them. Allies? Caddis repeated. The devils in Kuo have an alliance with the Yokai, Tsubaki explained. At least, the faction that is based in Kyoto. How many factions are there? Caddis asked, beeping her head. The dominant one is in Kyoto, but there's at least one other major group, Sona explained. And, of course, numerous smaller ones. Issei-kun's family is associated with the Kyoto-based one, in fact. This is more complicated than I thought, Caddis said, rubbing her head. Somehow, the idea of political complexity seemed to be wearing away at her skepticism. Nothing said authenticity like messy politics, after all. And welcome to my life, Kaori retorted with gentle sardony. Well? How's it look? Well, you're nailing Sumereko, Issei said judiciously. He didn't want to admit that the sight of Aika had made his breath catch for a moment. Looks good, he added lamely a moment later. Thanks, she said. I told Sachiko-sen I'd be bringing you along. I don't have to do any cosplay, do I? He asked dubiously. I know it's a general doujinshi convention, but I can't really think of anyone I want to dress as. Nah. It actually works better if you don't, if you're gonna be my bodyguard, she replied. Too easy for you to get mistaken as some random creeper in a costume otherwise. Yeah, I can imagine. It wasn't like he'd never been in the position of the horny guy with a camera before, Issei had to admit. Before he could say anything else, Aika energized a teleportation circle, and Sona's living room was replaced by an empty storage room. Waiting for them was a girl in flawless Fujiwara no Moku cosplay, who beamed as she saw Aika. Kiryu-san. Hello, Sachiko-san, Aika replied, exchanging bows with the other woman. This is my friend Hyoudou Issei-kun, and he'll be assisting us tonight as needed. Issei hurriedly bowed. Nice to meet you, Sachiko-san. Just tell me what you need. That went better than I expected, Aika said brightly, several hours later. The fortune-telling comedy duo routine that she and Sachiko had devised went off without an apparent hitch, and they were once again in Sona's living room. To be sure, the Touhou fans present had greatly enjoyed it, and Issei's eyes were still a little blurry from all the flashes going off. As predicted, he'd had primarily been used primarily for labor and to glower at anyone who looked like they were going to get handsy with the pawn. Not that he could fully blame them, he admitted to himself. Aika pulled off Usami Sumereko really well. Too well for his comfort. If she noticed, she showed no signs of it, which was a blessing. It seemed to, he agreed. Thanks for covering my dinner, by the way. It was only fair, Aika answered. Should have expected you to eat like a dragon, though, she added with a grin, and he had to laugh at that. Sona smiled as well and accepted the envelope that Aika offered her. She looked inside and nodded in satisfaction. Sachiko-san is very generous. She makes some serious bank from her streaming, Aika explained. She stood, stretching, and gave Issei a sideways look. So, Sachiko-san wants to try doing this at Gattacat in a couple months. Would you be willing to come along again? Same deal. I think so, as long as Sona-san's good with it, he answered. But I expect a nicer meal for out-of-town bodyguarding, he added with a good-natured smirk. As long as you try and keep your appetite in check, dragon, she teased, poking him gently in the shoulder. Is she planning on making that a regular thing? Sona asked, amused at the interplay between the two of them. If it turns out well, yeah, Ika replied with a nod. This could be good for us, Kaichu. I agree, Sona said with a nod of her own. Go ahead and see how things play out, Ika. Issei-kun, you have my permission to help her and to get dinner from her, she added with a smirk of her own. Baroque's gotta eat, you know, Issei chuckled. And I'd better get home, because I still have homework to do. Ika started to summon a teleportation circle, paused, and gave Issei a quick hug. Thank you for helping tonight, she said, suddenly finding the window fascinating. It was no problem, Issei replied quickly, studying the wall. He returned the hug briefly. Ika straightened up, clearing her throat, and teleported out without another word. Issei looked at the piece of carpet where the teleportation circle had been, and then at Sona. That was odd, he said hesitantly. Nice, but odd. I'd rather take it as a good sign that you get along with everyone, Sona said. She reached a hand out to him and suddenly looked thoughtful as he took it. I have an idea for tomorrow night. Long-range testing, huh? Issei mused. Sona nodded. I think it would be wise to know what the range on unknown dictator's abilities are. It'd be very useful if you could, for example, text or call us without your phone, from across Japan, or further. She paused in thought, then nodded. In fact, I'd like to start testing from extremely long range. I'm not really sure what you need me for, though, Kaori said dubiously. Your part is very important if you're willing, Sona explained. Issei-kun will use unknown dictator to call you while leaving his phone with you. We'll test how far away we can go while maintaining that call. I'm willing, Kaori replied, now looking curious. Issei offered her his phone and she tucked it into her school bag. So, where are you starting from? San Francisco, Sona said offhandedly. San Francisco, Issei and Kaori chorused, then exchanged dubious looks at having spoken in unison. San Francisco, Sona repeated, looking amused. I haven't had Ghirardelli chocolate in years. Tonight seems as good a time as any. You'd better bring me back some, the knight declared in a mostly joking attempt at haughtiness. Of course. Sona's humor only seemed to deepen. Are you really there? Really? Yes, Kaori-san, we're really in San Francisco, Issei said in amused exasperation. It was the third time he'd said it in the last 10 minutes. He and Sona were strolling, arm in arm, on Fisherman's Wharf, enjoying the cool late evening air. I want proof you're actually there. Actual, physical proof, the knight insisted. The chocolate isn't enough. Sona sounded deeply amused as well. It was almost as if she were hearing the punchline to some huge joke. Nope. Issei could hear the smile in her voice. A souvenir? You want a souvenir? He laughed. Fine, I'll bring you the most touristy t-shirt I can find, something that has San Francisco plastered all over it. Happy? Yes, Kaori replied, and he could almost see her nodding enthusiastically in his mind's eye. You do that, and I'll wear it next time we're training. We'll hold you to that, Sona interjected with a smile. Well, she asked for this, Issei snickered, patting the plastic bag. He and Sona sat on a bench overlooking the sea, eating crepes from Pier 39's Crepe Cafe. Despite the late hour, a little subtle magic usage kept them warm against the night chill. You two really have known each other a while, haven't you? Sona observed. She reached out, plucking a piece of Issei's ham and cheese crepe for herself. I guess. I was in the academy's first co-ed middle school class. Even then, we were in the same class together, so yeah, we have, Issei answered. He claimed a piece of Sona's dulce de leche crepe, washing it down with a gulp of root beer. Not Caddis, though. I think her folks were working in the US when she was in middle school, so she went with. Were you and Kaori friends in middle school? I guess we were. For a while, it looked like Issei trailed off, but what he didn't say was pretty clear anyway. But in third year, I did something really dumb and, well, that shot it in the foot. We didn't even start being friendly again until we joined your peerage. He got an odd look on his face, and Sona beeped her head. What is it? Just something I started thinking about. How quickly things started happening once we became devils, between me and Kaori-san and Ika-san. I guess we were civil to each other, but when we became devils, it's like a switch was flipped and suddenly we're each other's buddies. He hesitated, then said, it almost feels sometimes like they were ready for us to be friends like that, like they'd been ready for a long time. Like they'd just been waiting on me to pull my head out of my ass. He shrugged. That might have made sense for Ika-san. She didn't have Kaori-san and I's history. But he shrugged again. I can't begin to understand. They might have been, Sona said thoughtfully. It's also possible that Kaori didn't actually hate you for whatever happened in middle school. You never did talk about it, did you? No, we didn't, Issei admitted, then gave Sona a quizzical look. What brings all this up? She chuckled and reached for his hand. You don't have to pretend you don't have feelings for her, Issei-kun. Issei squeezed her hand reflexively, relief and guilt mingling in his expression. I'm sorry. Part of me still feels like I'm betraying you by even feeling anything for her, and he hesitated, then chuckled a self-mocking chuckle. And anyone else I might be feeling something for. Remember what I told you, Sona said, squeezing back. I wouldn't have made that offer if I hadn't decided I was okay with it long ago. And Kaori easily fits the guidelines I gave you. For that matter, so does the rest of my peerage. She smirked. Although I think you'd have an interesting time ahead if you wanted to make Saji part of your harem. Issei half choked on his crepe and hunched over. As soon as he could regain his breath, he gave Sona a dirty look. Or tried to, he was never, ever able to really muster the heat to make one stick. That's arg. I do not need that mental image. He reached for his root beer, draining half of it down. Would it help if I told you that I find her attractive, too? Sona said in an oh by the way tone. As Issei froze, she took the opportunity to snag another large piece of his crepe. So you really are curious about me getting Rule 63 ed, Issei finally managed. Sona nodded, smirking slightly. Handsome as you are, I don't doubt you'd be a beautiful girl. Thanks for the vote of confidence, he replied. He had the weirdest heart-on right now. Well, nothing wrong with that. I can't get after you for liking cute girls if I do too, he added with a chuckle. I'm still figuring out how much I like them, she explained. I do enjoy having a peerage full of beautiful girls, though. So, have you and Ria-senpai ever? Sona snorted. I suppose that's better than asking if Tsubaki and I had, considering that you're cousins. She shook her head. But no. Never with Ria's. Never any romantic involvement with another girl, not quite. She blushed slightly. One-sama and I are affectionate with each other. No doubt you've noticed how tactile she is. But even there, it's essentially skinship. I did kind of wonder about Sarani, Issei admitted. Then Sona's statement fully processed. He blinked and then asked, does that mean that you too would? Sona rolled her eyes and snorted. I knew that was coming. She might be persuaded, but I'll let you try and do the persuading. Maybe another time, Issei said. The thought was mind-searingly hot, but Sona didn't sound too enthused, so that was enough for him to drop the matter. So is it girls exclusively with her? She doesn't have a particular preference, Sona explained. She was engaged a long time ago to the eldest daughter of another noble house, but she died in the war against the old Satan faction. I never got to meet Yaoni-san, the war happened centuries before I was born. She took a drink from her iced tea and reached for Issei's hand again. Practically speaking, it might mostly be aesthetic appreciation for me. But in any event, Anata, trust me when I tell you that you're not being faithless to me or forcing me to accept something I don't want. You needn't do mental gymnastics to avoid hurting anyone. Issei squeezed her hand and kissed it. Okay. I won't avoid thinking about this anymore. You might try talking to her about this, too, Sona added dryly. After Golden Week, Issei said hurriedly. That'll be fine. The two of them lapsed back into companionable silence, their fingers interlacing again after a moment, and they looked out over the bay. I really did ask for this, didn't I? Kaori said dryly, examining the t-shirt. It was matte black, with I heart symbol, SF printed across the chest in big blocky letters. The heart symbol was a big bright blue, very nearly a match for the color of Issei's pyrokinesis. Yes, you did, Sona replied with good-natured reproach. And he was so amused, he got one for everyone in the peerage. Remember, you promised to wear this during training. She passed the knight another, smaller paper bag. Direct from the flagship store. Thank you. And yes, I'll make sure to wear this, she promised. A silly smile played across her face as she examined the shirt, then carefully folded it and tucked it away. Sona waited until Kaori emerged from her reverie before speaking again. Have you thought any more about what we discussed? Kaori blinked and nodded, looking pensive. Yeah. To be honest, Kaichu, I've been thinking about it constantly. I understand. Kaori, I don't mean to put pressure on you. But Issei-kun clearly has feelings for you, and if you're not willing to act on the ones you have for him, it's best you start distancing yourself from him now. Kaichu, I want to. Even then, I wanted to. But I'm not ready to. I don't feel ready to, and I can't ask Ice to wait for me to be ready. Yes, you can. He'll understand. He won't put pressure on you. I know, and somehow that almost makes me feel worse. But if you think he'll listen, if you think he'll wait alongside, I'll tell him, then. And you. After a moment, she added in a very small voice, I do want him. That's enough for now, to know that you feel that way. I want to wait until after Golden Week, though, Kaori said. I think I may need that time to get my thoughts in order. That should be fine. We'll be gone all Golden Week, anyway. Sona smiled wryly. If you did it now, you could come with us. We'll be spending a few days alone at one of my family's beach houses and you'd be welcome to join us." Kaori colored slightly and smiled ruefully. "I'm tempted. But I feel like I need to give some serious thought to how I do this." Rio looked down at the faceted gems and then at Issei. "Where did you get these?" "Dusan was kind enough to loan me the money for them," Issei admitted. "Aika-san helped me make sure they were the real deal and she helped polish them." "I see," she mused. "They're beautiful. I'm not sure why you're asking my help instead of a professional jeweler, though. I remember all the glass-blown art you made when I was younger," he explained. "Including the jewelry. I wanted to do something like that for Sona-chan's engagement ring." He gestured at the gems. "Alexandrite and pearl are her birthstones, and since her birthday is coming up, I thought that would be a good time to give it to her." "I see your point." Rio turned the gems over in her hands. "It's a sweet idea, son. Yes, I can help you with that, since your pyrokinesis isn't fine-tuned enough for this yet." She smiled. "Should I start planning on rings for anyone else?" "Ha-san." Issei turned bright red. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking, Issei," his mother told him gently. "But I'll let it be for now." She set the gems down on the table. "What were you thinking?" "Not sure," he admitted. "Maybe crush some of the pearls and one of the alexandrite, mix them in with the glass for color, and use the biggest alexandrite as the main stone." He shrugged helplessly. "I don't really know jewelry design terms." "It's been a while for me, but I think I remember the basics," Rio assured him. Issei nodded, looking thoughtful. "You should do something nice for your father in thanks for his help," she added. "And for Aika-chan. Maybe she'll be wearing one of these, too, someday." She grinned as her son blushed. "Maybe," he said in a soft voice. "And yeah, I should do something nice for them." And for he let out a breath and chuckled self-effacingly. "I should find out Kaori-san's birthday, too." "August 6th, Rio said offhandedly. Issei spun to look at her in surprise and her grin softened. "I asked her. Don't assume I don't notice things, Issei." "I guess you do," he admitted, hanging his head in good-natured chagrin. Sona let out a sigh of satisfaction. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the incident in Kyoto and Golden Week was finally in sight. She let her mind wander for a moment, imagining her and Issei playing in the shallows next to one of her family's lake houses, taking advantage of the relative isolation. That playing in the surf would likely progress in earthier directions before long. No need for swimsuits if they were the only ones staying in the house, after all. She felt arms slip around her waist, hands clasping just under her belly button. Issei's lips were warm on her neck. "Hi there," he murmured, pulling her close. "Hi yourself," she replied, covering his hands with hers and nestling back against him. "I'm fairly certain this isn't a standard part of learning to cook." "Not really," he admitted. "You look too good to resist, though." He kissed the back of her head. "Honestly, you've improved a lot. I think maybe you can try soloing next week." "Better keep a backup recipe on hand," she said dryly. "I appreciate the vote of confidence, though." "Hey, if cooking is the only thing you struggle with, you're light years ahead of me," he told her sincerely. "Don't sell yourself short, Issei-kun," she told him. "You hey now," she added, playfully swatting his arms as he pressed meaningfully against her. Not that she had any real objections to it, but she also had plans for the evening. "We need to finish making dinner, remember?" "And if I want you for dinner?" He replied lightly, although the undercurrent of desire was painfully apparent. Still, he released her with clear reluctance and reached for the knife and cutting board. "After the movie," Sona promised. "I really want you to watch this one with me. I think you'll appreciate it." She smirked. "Think of me as dessert." Ria's made a pleased sound as she saved the spreadsheet and shut down her laptop. Asia contracting with her had been a net positive, she thought. Not quite as much as making her bishop would have been, but she fully understood the factors that made that impractical. For her promise to Hyoudou-kun, she never let her be asked to do anything that would actually put her in danger, and, truth be told, she would have been disinclined to do so anyway. All in all, it had been a very good month for her peerage, particularly with the windfall Gasper and Hyoudou-kun had brought in. Even splitting that with Sona had put a very colorful feather in her cap. The Gremory heiress stretched and yawned, contemplating a quiet evening of binge-watching Sigi no Si. She began to rise from her desk, but froze as she saw a teleportation circle flare to life. As the light faded away, Riaz took stock of the new arrival. She was a beautiful, buxom woman with silver-white hair gathered into 2 short forelock braids and 2 long ones trailing down her back. Her Sarah's eyes were intelligent and observant, and she wore a serious expression with an underlying note of sympathy. She was clad in the uniform of a House of Gremory maid. Riaz knew better than most to not underestimate this woman, despite the servile attire. After all, she was an ultimate-class devil and had once been Sona Sitri's only real rival for the title of Leviathan. Even now, as the Gremory head maid, she was the family's de facto majordomo. Not even Ria's brother or father would trifle with her. Especially not a brother. After all, he happened to be married to her. Grafia-sama, she said wearily. Ria-sama, Grafia Lucifuge said solemnly, bowing respectfully. Can I fix you something? Ria said quickly. There were any number of reasons why Grafia might be here right now. It didn't necessarily mean. Oh, who was she kidding? Thank you, no. Grafia was definitely looking guilty. Not that Ria's blamed her for why she was almost certainly here. No, it really should be Otu-sama, but he had probably ducked out in a fit of guilt or cowardice or both. I think you know why I'm here. Riser. Ria said the name as if it were an obscenity. Grafia nodded. On second thought, perhaps you had better fix us both a drink. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.